are following us from different platforms. As we meet today, given the agenda that we have, honorable members, I would, without waste of time, really deal with just the formalities of convening meetings on this platform. Firstly, that at all times, to all the participants, it's important to make sure that your mics are muted and your video camera is off until you are recognized by the chairperson. Once recognized, then you can proceed to unmute your mic and switch on your video camera and proceed to speak. In a situation where there may be connectivity challenges, you would, with the permission of the chairperson, request that switch off your video camera so as to maximize the bandwidth and proceed to speak. From time to time, there may be those that may experience connectivity challenges and you have to reconnect back. And so at all times when you reconnect back to the platform, that your video camera is off and your mic is muted, as mics are sensitive and therefore could pick up background sounds that may interfere with the meeting or the speaker that may be on the platform. Whilst point of orders are allowed in terms of the rules on this platform, you'll keep your mic muted, raise your hand on the gadget, of which the committee support will also assist the chair to identify such. Only at that time, when you are recognized by the chairperson, that will proceed to unmute your mic and raise the point of order on which the chairperson could rule upon in terms of the rules. I advise honorable members not to raise unnecessary point of orders to a point of collapsing the meeting on this platform. With that having been said, I just want to confirm for purposes of record, firstly, if we are having the quorum. Secondly, if there are apologies received from the committee support.
Good morning, Chairperson. Chairperson, we have a quorum. And in terms of apologies, Chairperson, we have an apology for the Minister of Communications. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jerome. I also just check with honorable members if there may be those that have been forwarded, which may have not been recorded, and that we place those on record. Any other member who may be having an apology to be registered for the meeting? I don't see any on my side. I take it that there is no apology to be recorded from the side of the members. With that having been said, honorable members, I do know that we are also competing with the program of Parliament, and therefore other members would start moving at a particular time, especially those who are supporting the budget votes and participating physically today. But we are going to be qualitative because the reports also that are before us are important for our own engagement. Honorable members, as you'd see, that the agenda is flighted, which is the amended notice. Amended in the sense that in terms of the pre-planned program, we're also supposed to have a briefing on the conditions for the bailout and so on. But as members would be aware, we have had a briefing on the developments since the adoption of the program, and that will be kept then abreast on the new developments going forward, and therefore would have acted when there was a request to allow the negotiations that are taking place that does happen, and later be briefed by the ministry in that regard on how far they are on resolving the current challenges with SAPO, and we'll get a brief accordingly. But of course, we also appreciate that members have taken the initiative of asking questions even in the House with regard to the same, and there have been responses with regard to those conditions. So therefore, would be expecting more of a report that doesn't talk to the conditions as planned by the program once we convene SAPO again, but it will also be about an update and probably that time, including where the processes would have been. I just thought it's important to further clarify this point that our meeting is directed properly. The proposed times, which we think should help us conclude our business, as I said, qualitatively. It's the items as you see them. The report of the Public Service Commission on the feedback on the roundtable discussions has been circulated to members on time, and surely members would have had an opportunity of going through that. But we have allowed about 40 minutes maximum. Prof, again, you get the point. It's 40 minutes max that you take us through the silent points of the report. Thereafter, we take the response by SITA on that report, as they would have also received the report, and from the committee side would have wanted to be sure that they are responding to the matters that have been raised in the report, and therefore will be able to give us a sense of preliminary where are they and what other things are they doing. I think that would come out in the report. We're trying to also restrict that to 30 minutes so that members could still have the time to engage, even those that may leave the meeting for other tasks of Parliament, that they've engaged, but also be sure on whether the responses are in the right direction. Of course, taking into account the fact that we have just dealt with APPs of the departments, which includes its entities, whether we are also aligned to that. So that's basically the approach to the agenda. So we'll take the discussion immediately after the responses so that members engage comprehensively, having looked at also the responses. Then we'll take minutes that we said we would deal with. On the minutes, it will just be the committee work with the committee support, so would not hold other participants on the platform if they wish to leave at that point. As I welcome you, Chairperson of the Public Service Commission, Prof. Fikeni, and your team. So we decided we'll start with you to set the ground so that the responses are understood. I'm sure you'd be ready on your side. Please feel welcomed to this portfolio committee on communications and digital technologies in the National Assembly. I hope I'm still audible as I invite you, Prof. You'll be able to introduce your team and then take us through in the 40 minutes.
Honorable Chairperson, this is Commissioner Bacchus. I'm offering apologies on behalf of the Chairperson of the Public Service Commission, who this morning had a double engagement. He has to present on the professionalization framework, and offered his apologies to this honorable committee.
Thank you, Commissioner Bacchus. I'm sure you'd have now made arrangements on who leads on his behalf. We are now handing over to you.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. Yes, indeed, we have. Good morning, Honorable Chairperson, the Honorable Deputy Minister, Honorable members of the Portfolio Committee, and all the dignitaries in the meeting today. Honorable Chairperson, thank you very much on behalf of the PSC for giving the PSC this opportunity to present the Roundtable report on ICT. This morning in the platform on representing the PSC is my colleague, also Commissioner Makania, who was also in our briefing meeting previously. We are also joined by our DG, Advocate Dinky Dube, and our M&E team, DDG Matenjwa, Ms. Carmen Domingo Suarez, and this is the team that is here today virtually on the platform, supporting us to present the report.
Not sure if it's me who's been thrown out. On my side, there's no movement, no voice.
We can't hear, Chairperson.
PSC, we can't hear. No.
Yes,
no.
Chairperson, we are there. This is Commissioner Makanya. I assume that there may have been a technical challenge from the side of our team, but I'm trying to check on them quickly. Thanks, Chairperson.
A very good morning, Honorable Chairperson, Honorable DM, Honorable members, commissioners, DG and colleagues. We just received a message from Commissioner Bacchus that she's struggling a little bit with her connectivity. I think in that case, perhaps we can just proceed and hoping that she will get back online and she will proceed with the meeting. My name is Irene Matenjwa. I'm the Deputy Director General responsible for monitoring and evaluation at the Public Service Commission. And we have been responsible for undertaking this work. So, Honorable Chair, if you allow me, I'm going to take the committee through the presentation. Can we move to the next slide? Can we move to the next slide? Thank you. So in terms of the outline of the presentation, we will talk very briefly around the background for the study and also the rationale, objectives of the study. We'll also just take you through in respect of the consultations and engagements that we had, the roundtable itself, and what were the findings of the roundtables, the key recommendations and way forward, and we'll conclude on that note, Chairperson. So in respect of the background, what we're saying is that the PSC has, through its various studies, noted reports of inefficiencies with information and communication technology, ICT, support, and the negative impact it has on service delivery in public service. And these were discovered when we are doing our studies, whether it's research, in the internal processes of government departments, whether it's in service delivery, as we've indicated, as we visit frontline service delivery points, that ICT is not really supporting the processes of government for efficient service delivery. And what we found is that this really manifests into three broad areas. The first one really at macro level is the ICT infrastructure asset. And what we're saying is that the aging and or outdated infrastructure, which affects the speed of ICT transformation, is an issue. And despite the significant investment that we have made in ICT over the last 20 years, we realize that government has not seen the benefit of technology impact and improvement of efficiencies, especially in frontline service delivery, where we should be more efficient in respect of how we interact with citizens and the delivery of services. The second issue that we picked up is really around the ICT governance. And here we picked up that there is inadequate, ineffective ICT governance frameworks, ineffective governance structures and policies within departments, inadequate and ineffective systems related controls. And also in respect of performance and capability, we find that there is frequent and or long downtime of technology, which is very slow, lack of or poor integration of ICT between governments. For instance, if you look at the medium-term strategic framework, when we started 2014, 2019, government was more focused on bringing this integration amongst departments, where, for instance, you would have a Department of Home Affairs, SASA, also the JCPS cluster, really connected for efficient service delivery, but also for making life much easier for the citizens so that they don't hop from one department to the other, because once the information is available on the systems of government, it becomes easier. We haven't, to date, 2023, not achieved that. The IT security weaknesses has manifested in, amongst others, cyber attacks. I think we've heard the story of the Department of Justice, the NSG as well. The IT expenditure really is not justifiable, and government has not received the value or benefit from money spent on IT projects or contract. So, Chairperson, as we go on also with just the problem statement around this matter in respect of our background, we are saying that our ICT function lacks really mature practices. And if you look into the left-hand side of our slide, what we are saying is that the lack of oversight on ICT performance. And what we found, and really when we spoke to most of the CIOs in departments, they tell us that there is inadequate support from EXCO on matters of IT in government. Usually we are told that this becomes really the last item, whether it's strategic planning or it's EXCO or governance structures within departments. So not much attention and support is provided to those that are working in this area. The knowledge of the lack of knowledge and experience of those charged with IT governance is really a problem. So on average, if you look into a IT person within government, you really cannot compare them with those that are IT in the private sector in terms of knowledge and experience and expertise in this environment. The poor ICT project oversight, CIOs told us that they're really on their own, and there are no systems or structures that are really put in place to do oversight over ICT projects in government. And the lack of performance monitoring and processes also is an issue. So if you go to the right-hand side of the slide again, we just talk about the lack of ICT skills and capacity. So you would see that from the information that we obtained from GPSA in terms of the survey that they conducted in 2021, we had 1.1 million public servants in our system, national and provincial, and out of that, only 4,523 were staff in the ICT environment. And of that, really, you actually had only 172 who were in business and system analysis, 317 are system developers and maintenance staff, and IT security is just 64. So in essence, it tells you that the balance of that is basically officials who are doing IT administration. These are the people who are helping us to change passwords, and if a laptop is frozen and so on, and those just administrative tasks. And in respect of ICT budget, again, the global spend trend is 4%, but you would look there that in terms of our government, at 2020, 2021, we only spent 1.07% on our ICT. Now, why did the Public Service Commission embark on a project like this? It's because, as I said earlier on, we have realized the potential that ICT has in terms of transforming a service delivery, but also the inefficiencies that we have picked up in the public service as we engage governments. And this we see both from internal processes where you find that the modernization of our system is still behind. If you look at things like leave, if you look at things like performance management and development system and so on, we're still really paper-based by and large. But also what worries us is the work that we have done when we engage with citizens at frontline service delivery, and some of whom would say, you know, I'm told that I need to come back and check whether my ID is okay, it's ready, where else actually I could just get an SMS. I'm just making an example with ID. It runs across, whether it's the police or whatever, and so on. And citizens are saying, but I've got a phone. I could just get an SMS that tells me that, you know, your application is ready and so on. And that is the lack of this modernization of our systems. Now, the Public Service Commission is also mandated to investigate, monitor, evaluate the organization and administration of the public service and propose measures to ensure effective and efficient performance within the public service. And this is the mandate that the PSC gets from the Constitution in terms of Section 196B for us to embark on a study of this nature. Therefore, the aim really of the project was to delve into the whole ecosystem of the provision of government ICT and to propose measures to ensure effective and efficient support within the public service. And when we say ecosystem, the idea was not necessarily just to look into SITA. The idea was to look into what is the role of SITA, what is the role of other institutions that have got a responsibility here to play, but also what is the role of those CIOs as well, who are running on day-to-day basis with regard to ICT within their departments. So specifically, as you would know, that SITA is mandated really to play a very much bigger role in this space. We had to assess how SITA is organized in executing its role of providing effective support to national, provincial governments, to identify the challenges experienced by government departments in terms of provision and management of ICT and the impact thereof in service delivery, and also to assess the underlying reasons for such challenges and review the interventions put in place to deal with them in relation to ICT, and also propose measures at the end of the day. Now, Chairperson, we started with very intense process of consultation and engagement, just also to obtain buy-in, but also to make sure that everybody was on board, everybody understood where the Public Service Commission was coming from and what we needed to achieve. So we had quite a number of bilateral engagements with DCDT, the acting DG there, and his staff. And we also wrote to the minister, obviously, as the shareholder of SITA. We had engagement with SITA around this matter, just to bring clarity in terms of really what we wanted to achieve. The DPSA is a department that is responsible for norms and standards in respect of ICT. We brought them on board, as well as the GTO Council. And we also engaged with the presidency. The AGSA was played a very important role in terms of really clarifying in respect of audit and their findings and what some of the issues that they really deal with. And you would know that in respect of audit, I think IT is one of those areas that comes under the spotlight. So they shared a whole lot of information in terms of how they're really struggling in this area in national and provincial departments. Obviously, National Treasury, we brought them on board. But we also extended again our engagements to the chairperson of the portfolio committee to inform him that we are working on a project of this nature and what we really intend to achieve. Now, the next step was for us to have a peer working group, which was convened on the 31st of October with the above mentioned stakeholders. But what we did as well, Chairperson, is that we identified certain departments such as Home Affairs, Police, Justice, Justice and Constitutional Development, Minerals, Resources, and Energy. And these were some kind of like case studies, because in a peer working session, we did not want to deal with the policy and governance and departments, but also service delivery departments, so that they can also come and share with us what are some of the difficulties and so on. Then, Chairperson, we moved on now to have a roundtable discussion on the 30th of November. The roundtable discussion was attended by the stakeholders that I've mentioned. In addition to this, we invited all the CIOs of national, provincial departments to be in attendance. And also we did extend our invitation to stakeholders that are also not in government, just to come and share lessons and so on. Now, what was the purpose of the roundtable? The roundtable was meant to help us understand the challenges that are faced by government, obviously taking into account what we obtained from the sample departments, so that we could also have more focus and manage the roundtable, because if everybody were to be given an opportunity to present, it would have taken us long. So we focused on those departments, and also just to understand what is the impact thereof of those challenges, as well as identify short and medium and long-term solutions towards improved service delivery. And some of these are really contained in the report itself. And the expected outcome of the roundtable was to identify the critical areas for optimizing the provision of ICT, have a platform for sharing knowledge and lessons. And this really worked very well, Chairperson, because when we were in the meeting, we got to learn from departments who had moved a little bit on a certain matter, and they shared with us that this is how we are handling the matter and so on, and others could also learn from that. But also we wanted to create an opportunity for collaboration among stakeholders, role players, which meant that we needed also to strengthen this cohort of experts of our CIOs, so that they could be able to reach each other in case they needed support and so on. Now, the findings of the roundtable, we just selected few that we want to engage on, but if you look at the report, you'll find quite a lot, also in respect of what is working. And we thought, just for the purpose of the engagement today, let us just focus on perhaps issues that requires a little bit of attention. The first one being the functionality of SITA, the failing infrastructure asset, ineffective ICT governance, business and IT misalignment, poor ICT resourcing, funding for ICT. Chairperson, from now on, I'm going to be taking you through those key areas in respect of what were the findings, but also what were some of the responses and proposed solutions. On this slide, we'll deal with the functionality of SITA. The main issue that came out strongly was really around the outdated SITA Act, which requires changes to enable digital transformation in government. Departments raised quite a number of issues, but key amongst others was the overpricing of both network and end user computing services, the ineffective and efficient procurement process that is often delayed over multiple years and fraught with irregularities. SITA's procurement processes were said to be cumbersome, and government departments are seeking exemption from this. The unreliable network services that are characterized by intermittent downtimes, an ineffective business model that prevents necessary agility from meeting customers' needs, and delays in modernizing government applications. Some of the proposed solutions were around the fact that perhaps we need to consider amending SITA Act to harmonize the policy environment, the legislative framework, and repurposing of SITA, which should include the review of the procurement and pricing model, devolve procurement of non-mandatory goods and services to government departments, and in doing so, also making sure that there is capacity and capability for those that we decide on the development of this function. Resolve tension around the placement and role of SITA to support the implementation of e-government strategies. Alternative network connectivity solutions, particularly in rural areas, should be explored and sourced. Strengthen contract management capability and infuse skills transfer in contracts. Chairperson, on the second one, on failing infrastructure asset, the issue was frequent network downtime, obsolete legacy systems across many government departments, including National Treasury, maintain systems such as PESAL, the BAS logist. We know about that, and we know about the pending IFMS system, cybersecurity concerns, and these are really costly to maintain. Government systems are not integrated or inoperable, as I said earlier on. Government departments have inadequate bandwidth and face frequent cybersecurity attacks. And some of the responses and proposed solutions were that perhaps we need to consider overhauling government ICT infrastructure and consider alternative connectivity solutions. Secure cloud services are needed. A complete modernization program is needed to enhance and integrate many disparate systems. Significant investment is required for government to build up its cybersecurity capability, as well as implement controls. Chairperson, on the third one, which is ineffective ICT governance, the issues that came out was the ICT governance and overall management of ICT, poor IT governance processes that are not managed and implemented effectively, adequate ICT governance frameworks that were not implemented, the IT steering committees that are not operating optimally, lack of various levels of representation in IT steering committee meetings, creating challenge to implement long-term solutions, management delegations and accountability in this space, and change management, and really issues just around the culture is it's an issue. We lack really sufficiency and effort in this space. And Chairperson, I need to indicate that these issues that we're talking about are not necessarily for SITA. As I said earlier on, we delve into these issues to really understand the ecosystem, and you would see really the role of other departments, how they come in, such as DPSA as the responsible department for norms and standards, but also for making sure that the Digital Council is operating quite efficiently. But also departments themselves have got a responsibility in terms of understanding their business model and operations, and hiring the best of our IT cohort. Now, the responses and solutions in this area, it is essential to align business objectives with IT objectives to manage IT risk and ensure that IT-related activities are aligned with business activities. Leaders in government should change from being reactive to proactive and take risk. Clear roles and responsibilities are needed with documented rules, policies, standard operation procedures, and so on. Improve oversight and controls of ICT project and environment. Develop a change management process to align business with IT to change the culture. Chairperson, as we move on to the next one is business and IT misalignment. What we found is that CIOs are not always represented in decision-making committees such as ESCO, where prioritization of technologies and systems to meet the business needs are made. The business IT dyad requires the involvement of business users in the architecture, design, and solution choices. Procurement, procuring the correct ICT solution and technologies is very important. Close working relations is required between business, ICT, SCM, to have synergy between business and technology strategy. And really, Chairperson, this is where National Treasury and Chief Procurement Officer comes into play to really assist and guide in the space of procurement in the ICT space. Now, the responses and solutions is that the CIOs need to participate in the priority of technology and integrating system to support the business strategy. Accountability for technology use is necessary, and delegate this role to someone to be able to be responsible if technology is down. Chairperson, the second last one is the poor ICT resourcing issue. There is a shortage of skilled, competent IT professionals in government. That is a fact. Salaries of IT professionals in government are not on par with industry salaries. Many government officials, executive and front-end staff do not have the digital literacy skills to develop services to citizens in e-government. E-services are not designed to consider the end user's need. So we make these decisions on our own without even engaging the citizens in terms of how we can improve ICT to meet their needs. The responses in this area is in-house solution can be developed and focus on homegrown systems is important really for future innovation. Prioritization of appointments to fill all critical vacant posts, recruit, develop, retain an agile, multidisciplined, highly skilled, highly performing workforce. Use employment graduates in digital projects. Upskill current government staff to equip them with digital literacy skills. Use 4IR technology when developing e-services to ease the use of these services. Design an e-services with the user's need in mind and become the client. That is taking really the client in mind when we do this. Now, on this point, Chairperson, I just need to indicate that government is in the process of implementing the professionalization of the public service. And we did indicate, as well as Public Service Commission, that as we look into various classifications for the professionalization, there is a need also to consider this space if we are to grow our ITC space so that it gets professionalized and so on. Funding for ICT, we've got limited funding that is existing in government to modernize our ICT operations. The PFMA is ineffective and it's a hurdle to meet ICT needs for public service delivery. And I think we probably saw that article in the Business Day that spoke to the same matter. The responses, again, we're saying that there is a need to increase funding to modernize ICT to implement 4IR technologies. However, there is a need also to make sure that budget is spent effectively and efficiently with a focus on return on investment, and also manage some of the wastages that we hear about in this space. Chairperson, I've got 2 slides left. The one is about key recommendations. If you look into the report, we raised quite a number of recommendations, but today we just want to outline this following. The first one being update the SITA Act and repurpose the institutional arrangement of SITA to fast-track service delivery to citizens in e-government. SITA must embrace and assist all government departments with fit-for-purpose solutions. Modernization of ICT in government is imperative, and there has to be upskilling of ICT professionals in government through a partnership with NSG, state departments. Moreover, departments need to attract more ICT professionals to help execute the 4IR vision as articulated in their strategic plans. Often the human and financial resources existing does not match the execution of the 4IR goals of the departments. Improving the SITA cost model and procurement processes as an urgent priority to help government departments acquire more ICT solutions faster. Develop a framework and guidelines for essential service departments to get exemption from SITA's procurement process to provide more efficient and effective service delivery. And that the exemption process must be fully consulted, defined, and authorized by both National Treasury and the Minister of DCDT. SITA to prioritize the upgrading of obsolete infrastructure in most government departments and to do so at cost-effective rates. The DPSA should facilitate the upskilling and training of ICT personnel to implement modern technologies aligned with the 4IR agenda and consider the inclusion of these scarce skills within the professionalization framework in collaboration with NSG, as I said earlier. National Treasury should prioritize the modernization of ICT in the budgeting process, in particular the broadband connectivity 4IR programs in government to improve service delivery. Now, Chairperson, really just as a way of follow-up, what we are saying is that engagements with SITA and Minister of DCDT on the outcomes of the roundtable and the draft implementation plan of the PSC is underway. We've already written to the Minister. We've already written to the Minister and to inform him, but also to request an engagement with him around the report. The presentation, we need to present the findings of the roundtable to FOSAT. We also need to forward the report to the National Speaker after all these consultations, monitor the implementation of our recommendations to ensure improvement of ICT and to hold all role players accountable. And since these are critical and transversal service delivery issues, we will also have a press conference once we are done with all the consultations, just to really talk about these matters. And obviously the implementation of the roundtable report recommendations through means of drafting a draft implementation plan, and which identifies really the key focus areas over a period of time. Chairperson, if you allow me, I want to hand over to Commissioner Bakas. My presentation ends here. Commissioner Bakas.
Thank you very much, DDJ Matendo. That was a great presentation. My apologies again, Chairperson and honorable members, for the break in transmission. We are back. Just perhaps to add that the progress in terms of our consultations and tabling of these reports is going quite well. On the 15th of May, our DG met with the MD, the new MD of SITA, and a very good meeting was held. It was very positive, and there was agreement that the MD of SITA will continue to facilitate meetings with the PSC and of course the SITA board on the ICT roundtable. Also, looking at making commitments towards revisiting the pricing models and service standards for SITA, which obviously is part of the MD's now turnaround plan. So we had quite a progressive and constructive meeting, and we feel a bit comforted by the assurances, and we will continue to take this forward. And as I said earlier, Honorable Chairperson, the purpose of this meeting was to honor our commitment to the chairperson in the briefing meeting in November last year to say that once the roundtable had been concluded and matters were processed internally and the report was brought forward, we would definitely table it before this committee. So we thank the Honorable Chairperson for this opportunity to give the progress report, and we will continue to pursue, to get the best outcome out of these roundtables. Thank you, Honorable Chairperson.
We thank the PSC as we give over to SITA, but of course led politically by Deputy Minister for a brief overview and the direct on how they are going to be responding. Deputy Minister. Nice.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson, and greetings to all the members of the committee. Greetings as well to the commissioners of the PSC and the staff there, and the chair of the board of SITA, and the officials led by the MD. Chairperson, we are not going to say much except just to say that we do welcome and appreciate the work that has been done by the PSC through the roundtable process. Already the majority, if not all of the recommendations are being followed up and are being attended to by the entity and by the department. The minister is seized with the process of repurposing of SITA as mandated both by cabinet and the colleagues in cabinet. And it's a process that as soon as it's done, the minister will be able to come back and brief the committee and give feedback to the Public Service Commission. I must also say, Chair, that since this report was concluded, there has been a number of developments in SITA itself, in the entity. The new MD has since joined the organization after his appointment was approved by cabinet last year. So he joined, I think, around last month in April. And of course, he has brought in some changes, some new strategic focus of the entity. We have working with the entity. I think it's our determination that we must fully capacitate the entity. As you know, that the SITA has been really struggling in having a stable management structure. There's been a number of acting CEOs, MDs over a period of time. At some stage, it was placed under administration. And so the results of that instability are reflected in this roundtable report. And so now we are stabilizing the entity, and so we hope to follow up on the majority, if not all of the recommendations that are there in the report. The presentation that SITA will be making here will be both responding to these recommendations or findings, but also looking into the future of the kind of SITA that we would like to see. So without wasting any further time, Chair, let me just hand over to the entity then to take us through. I think, yeah, MD, if you can come through.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. Thank you, Chair. Good morning to all the members of the committee and the representatives from the PSC and all protocol observed. Indeed, colleagues, we do welcome the report. And as Advocate Barkas has said, we have had several engagements with the PSC, many of them very progressive, I must add, in terms of how we turn the situation around. And so I'm very pleased to see that reflected in the report. Colleagues, before I start, I am not alone. I am joined by the Deputy Chairperson of SITA, Dr. Stella Vuma. And I'm also sitting alongside me is our Executive for National and Regional Consulting, Mr. Ntutule Tsenye, who will also be supporting me in giving this presentation. So colleagues, without wasting time, what I will do is I will hand over to Mr. Tsenye just to give context to the roundtable discussions and SITA's involvement, as that is something that I was not part of, that happened before I joined. And so I would not be able to accurately represent that. But in terms of the way forward, I'll then come back and summarize our overall response before going into some of the detail. Through you, Chairperson, Mr. Tsenye.
Thank you so very much, MD. Honorable Chair, thank you so very much for the opportunity, portfolio committee members. Let me go straight into the issues. And I think the way we had structured our presentation was then also to give some context to, the presentation itself. I think, having gone through the presentation by the Office of the Public Service Commission, we will then skip a few of the slides that we've got, as that particular context really has been provided, very adequately and comprehensively. So I will be skipping some of these slides, but I will start off, perhaps if we move to the next slide, I will then start off with some contextual issues in terms of, the engagements. And I think just to confirm and reaffirm that indeed, this has been a very consultative process between ourselves and the Public Service Commission in just making sure that, we are aligned and understand each other, especially in terms of the arrangements, the mandate of SITA in relation to, the study itself as it was articulated with us. So we thought it was important, obviously, that we would then be able to give some background in terms of those engagements. But I think that also has been adequately covered by the PSC presentation. Perhaps I could just zoom on the engagement that we had in bullet point number 3, which then talks to when the engagement between the Office of the Public Service Commission and the mandate holders had happened with the key departments. It then came through to us as the management, as well as the executives at SITA, to then engage with the Office of the Public Service Commission to really try and take them through what then the mandate of SITA covers, and how do we then go about executing on that mandate, in relation to the work that is being done directly by the various, departments, national and provincial. So I think we then had that session where we went through thoroughly the mandate issues, the business operating, models, our service, IT service value chain, the issues around, mandatory and non-mandatory services, the issues really around procurement in particular, because most of the issues obviously hinged around, the turnaround times and the delays around procurement. So we thought it was important that we clarify that. And post that, we then went more into, the granular operational stuff as it comes from the lines of business, so that we can then be able to look into the actual service delivery engines within SITA and how we interface with the client environment. And so those are the engagements that had happened that then eventually obviously led to some of the engagements obviously at the key or premier annual event, the conference, what we call GovTech, where we then wanted to make sure that on the 15th of September, that we would then also expose the commission to the whole landscape of SITA engagements with the clients, with the business, the industry, and the various players within the ICT, public sector ICT, space. And we thought that was really very helpful, just to see these things in action, be able to engage with the various, players on the ground, as well as continue some of the sideline meetings with SITA alongside, GovTech. And I think as the presentation from the commission, then that obviously then ended with that peer working group that met at the end of October, obviously as a precursor to the actual roundtable. So we really tried to make sure that we are aligned with the commission to make sure that as we get into the roundtable, that at least there is full understanding of the various issues. And perhaps on the back of that background, I'll then move to the next slide, Tanya. I think these issues have also been outlined as part of the background. I will not then go into the objectives and all of that. I think it was adequately covered from the PSC presentation. Perhaps just to highlight here the 4 line departments, obviously, that were then used here as a case study, for various sound reasons. And I think we were talking about the essential service departments earlier on as the PSC was presenting. These are public-facing, obviously, departments like your Home Affairs, and I think a lot has been said around that, and we do engage a lot on that. The DMRE in terms of the mining, licensing system that has taken quite some time, and we're glad that there has been movement on that. And of course, the biggest one being the South African Police Service, just given the outreach of the department, and then the Department of Justice for a variety of reasons, including also that as the PSC report indicated, that there was some security vulnerability that had been picked up there. And so we came in to really engage there with the department and amongst others, just to make sure that, contextually things are clear, that when that security breach, happened, it was one of those engagements that we've been having with the department to make sure that they are on the SITA, VPN, that they are not running a mandatory network service on their own. And hence, when this issue then came up, we needed to come back again to see how we then help the department through and hopefully then move them from a private, VPN to then the SITA one. And I think also there's been unbelievable progress, since then between SITA and the department and the engagements with the DG and also when the MD came in, that was the first DG actually that the MD engaged with. Just to make sure that we've got these things going. So perhaps, Tanya, we move forward on that so that I don't take a lot of the time. I think here I just want to look at the first 3 issues that were raised, because they help also in just the contextualization on the SITA, mandate, but also the ICT challenges as raised, because not all of them would then be really addressed by SITA per se. And I think the report was very clear in articulating those issues, capacity issues and so forth. But I think these 3 issues, because they are generic enough, I think one, obviously looking at the complexity of the ICT delivery institutional environment, in the public sector. And I think this has been adequately covered in terms of the, not only the positioning of SITA, the movement from DPSA to DCDT and the issues around that. And I think that, the chairperson in the presentation at the roundtable had covered that adequately to contextualize, that it's not only the institutional arrangement in terms of where SITA belongs, but it's a whole number of other issues perhaps that needed to also be taken care of as that transitioning was happening. So there is obviously that issue. The inadequate or aging and obsolete ICT infrastructure, I think the report has covered that adequately, that the public service at large is obviously, seized with this problem of, aging, obsolete infrastructure, and what are we therefore doing in that regard? And so we will then talk to some of the things that we are doing in that environment. And of course, the poor performance capability generally, that also would be informed by a number of areas that the Public Service Commission report had touched on, the issues around CIOs, the issues of capacity around those issues. I will then not get into the next issues in terms of some of the issues that came through from the oversight institutions, as that was also adequately covered in the preceding report. If we can move forward on this one, Tanya. If we can go to the next slide, the next one, the issues of controls and so forth were also adequately covered. So we will then, on the back of that brief background, just to contextualize, what we would then be talking to in terms of the solutions and some of the things that we are doing and some of the things that we would continue to do as we look into this reimagined, agency. Then we will then be able to talk to that. And perhaps at this stage, I would then hand back to the MD to just quickly then run through some of these areas. And then I could come back and look into some of the specific issues related to the report. And then we could close on that note. So back to you, MD.
Thank you, Mr. Tanya. So colleagues, SITA is undergoing a transformation, and I think a transformation that's long overdue, in terms of where we need to take the digitalization of the state forward. We have 5 focus areas that we are looking at, and many of these initiatives are already well underway. The first focus area is around client centricity, which is how do we bring back client centricity into SITA? Part of the instability and the hollowing out that's happened over the years is it's taken out the soul of the organization from a client-focused perspective, to the extent that sometimes when things come into the system, they take very long, and you find that it's because of internal handoffs between different functions in the organization and the like. So how do we bring back client centricity to ensure that every single client request, issue, or new initiative is prioritized and receives the right attention at the right time? The second focus area is what we are calling business excellence. How do we reimagine SITA, the operating model, its strategy for the future? So we've seen what it's like since 2000 when it was launched. It's now 2023. What should that look like from a business excellence perspective? Number 3 is a focus on partnerships. SITA cannot do everything on their own. How do we ensure that we involve the private industry? How do we involve that we make sure that we involve SMMEs, Black and women-owned businesses? How do we ensure that we can have collaboration amongst other SOEs and collaborate with academia to ensure that we can deliver effectively, to our end clients, which ultimately are our citizens? The fourth focus area speaks to investments, and this is talking to investments in key infrastructure, because that is one of the key issues that came out of the PSC report, but also as we speak to various clients, that's one of the key areas, and we'll look into that as well. How do we invest in certain key infrastructure to ensure that it is future focused, that it is fit for purpose, and can take us forward into the future? And then the last focus point is around acquisition and expansion. So once we've now stabilized, we've done the internal business excellence, we've partnered appropriately, and we've invested in the infrastructure, how do we then expand the role that it can play, to ensure that we can cover other areas right now that we're currently not looking at? So I'll go back to the first one, which is around the client-centric organization. And I just want to highlight just a few key things. I'm not going to go through absolutely everything there. The first thing that we're doing around client centricity is we're bringing back what we call a client forum and a client exco. And what this simply is, members, is it is a forum that happens at each of the regional and national levels to ensure that every single client issue is discussed to understand where it is in the value chain of SITA, whether it is in the proposal development process, it's in the pricing stage, whether it is something that's in the procurement phase or service and maintenance phase, across the entire value chain to understand where that is, and to then raise and escalate issues where they've been sitting in a particular value chain for a very long time. Now, these issues then also feed into what we call a client exco, which I chair. So the client exco is there to then highlight per client, per cluster, where the various issues are and where things are stuck in that particular value chain, so that they can receive the right level of executive support to ensure that they can move forward within the various processes within SITA. This is a critical process to ensure that we are very client-centric, that we can raise issues before clients actually see them, that we can tell them this request has aged longer than is anticipated within our SLA, and then be able to proactively engage the various DGs and GTOs and the like to ensure that we can resolve those issues in a timeliest manner. So that is a critical one. And I must say that with regards to this one, we are also bringing back the role of the COO within SITA. It is a role that was there from the inception of SITA, but over time it was, it moved out of the system. It's a very critical role to ensure that the whole operation across the value chain is looked at, that the various processes, I know we've spoken a lot about procurement, but there are other processes as well that need to be looked at and optimized, so that there's a person that eats and sleeps and drinks the client and make sure that every single client request goes through the system without any delay. And so that is something that we'll be doing within the next 90 days. In fact, the interviews for that role will be happening within this month. The second thing I just want to highlight with regards to a client-centric organization is the review of the SITA pricing model and the revision of the various tariffs. We have launched a process internally led by our CFO to review all of our pricing models. The current pricing models within SITA are quite rigid. They're based on a catalog of services that are quite inflexible given the changing landscape that we have within the environment. So that is something that we'll be looking at within this year, to have a complete revision of the SITA pricing models. And that we believe is going to be one of the things that will go a long way to alleviating some of the pressure that our clients feel in this aspect. If I can move on to the second one, which is the business excellence. And I think that, one of the two main things I want to highlight here is around reviewing of the SITA strategy and operating model. When SITA was envisaged in 2000, or before that and launched in 2000, the landscape of technology at that point in time was quite different. The biggest technologies at that time were mainframe, were ERP systems, maybe SCADA systems if you worked in logistics. That was it. The rate of change in that landscape was not very fast. And so you could easily cover your entire landscape and make sure that you can deliver quickly and on time. But if you fast forward to 2010, the rate of change of technology across a number of areas has increased, not just linearly, but exponentially. It's increased to a point where you simply cannot keep up with the rate of change of technology, which means that your clients across the various departments, their requests are also increasing at a rate of knots. So I was sitting with a DG of Department of Justice, and he was asking, how can we use ChatGPT, for example, to help them to draft some of their legal proceedings in that documentation. So this is the rate of change that we find ourselves in 2023. And we need to ask ourselves, how do we then interpret the SITA model in light of the changing macroeconomic environment, where the rate of change is no longer linear, but is now exponential? And so we asked ourselves the question, what would it look like for SITA to be a facilitator of the exchange of goods and services between the public sector and the private sector? And of course, there'll be those things that SITA must do on its own because of, it might be issues of cybersecurity or issues of state security and the like. And so we are busy unpacking this model, colleagues, to understand how we can then pivot towards this model. But one interesting anecdote that I like to use is the role that SARS plays in the economy. You can go buy your loaf of bread from any spaza shop, a Woolworths, a Spar, local 7-Eleven, wherever. SARS does not mind where you go buy your loaf of bread. But once you get your receipt and you look right at the bottom of the receipt, you will be coming back to this committee to then unpack that in detail. That will explain how that will happen. And we're quite excited about this because we believe, we were speaking with the Deputy Minister last week, that we can add at least 100 billion to the ICT sector in this country if we can follow that model properly. And so we'll be unpacking that in detail. So that is one of the things that we are doing in responding to that outdated model of SITA, and how do we then reimagine it for the future. The other thing that I just want to touch on, because it was highlighted, is around the supply chain reforms and then the devolvement. The first thing there around supply chain reforms is we are automating the procurement lifecycle across all of SITA. We have partnered with Microsoft. We met with the MD of Microsoft last week, and we have their full support in terms of doing this. We've mapped the entire value chain from when we receive a request all the way to the point where it's awarded, and we'll be working with Microsoft to automate that end-to-end, colleagues, and we want to do that within the next 2 quarters. So that is something that is receiving the utmost attention from a SITA perspective. The next one around devolvement, and to develop the frameworks and guidelines around making sure that we do that properly. Again, we've made significant progress with regards to this. In fact, we've also met with the AG to get them to help us, to almost do a parallel audit process so that we ensure that whatever guidelines we put in place, they are guidelines that can be auditable, that we don't just devolve something away and then later on the departments get hit by audit findings from the AG. So we're involving the AG. The AG has actually given us a date where we can come and do a workshop with them to help us to develop those guidelines to ensure that we don't do something that is not unintended, that is an unintended consequence. And I think one of the biggest challenges with regards to this is the issue of parceling, where if you devolve 10 million rands worth of procurement, even if it's a non-monetary service, there is a risk, and the AG did raise this, that departments then go and start to parcel, and break up a big order into smaller chunks to try and circumvent the entire process across government. And this is one of the controls that we're working with the AG to help us to develop, so that we can make sure those guidelines protect us against such an eventuality. If I can move on to focus area number 3, which is around partnerships. We have met in the last almost 1.5 months that I've been here. We've met with around 8 big tech CEOs, including Google, Microsoft, AWS, Oracle, Huawei, and the like, to say how can we partner properly to accelerate the development, of digital initiatives in the state. How can we ensure that we involve SMMEs in this process? How can we make sure that we train thousands of young youth and also citizens in this process? And I must say that has been a very encouraging engagement with the private sector, where they want to be involved in assisting us in some of the challenges that we are having. We are also going to be hosting an industry day and also an SMME day within the next quarter. And the purpose of these initiatives is to ensure that we can invite the small and medium enterprises sector to a day where we can explain exactly how the SITA processes work, how they can get involved in some of the processes that we have, the projects that we have, the initiatives that we have. Because a lot of them, when you discuss with them, it's not a matter of them being unable, it's a matter of them not having the right information to understand how to engage with SITA in an appropriate way. And so we'll be launching some of these initiatives, colleagues, in the next few months. The next focus area around investment and investment in key infrastructure, I think, is quite critical. And I've listed quite a few there. I will touch on 2. The first one is cybersecurity. We need to look at the cybersecurity strengthening across the entire landscape, whether it is networking, end user computing, and the like. We need to strengthen that. And so we're investing quite a lot of money in making sure that that is something that we can strengthen. In this year alone, we'll be looking at 100 government department sites to do a cybersecurity assessment. And in this year as well, we are going to be upgrading the cybersecurity across all of our VPNs within SITA, which is why it's important that government departments are within the SITA network, because that's where we're making the investment, to ensure that there is protection from cybersecurity. Sometimes, colleagues, when departments decide to go on their own, these are some of the unintended consequences where cybersecurity threats come in because they're not necessarily experts in the area of cybersecurity. And I think this is why it's quite critical that even as we revise the SITA model, we ensure that the role and mandate of SITA is still protected, that even if as people go and engage directly with suppliers, that the mandatory parts, the networking, the cybersecurity, the data hosting, etc., is still looked after and vetted by SITA to ensure that it is compliant. The second part is the network business, where we've made over a 400 million rand investment over the last few years to turn our network into a software-defined network. And we're already starting to see massive amounts of benefits from this investment. And I think Mr. Tanya will touch briefly on that just to show the colleagues how that has happened and how we continue to then invest forward with regards to that. And then the last one, colleagues, is just around future aspirations. Once we've stabilized in those 4 focus areas, then how do we then start to expand and cover other areas, IoT, big data, that aren't necessarily looked at right now in a significant light, so that we can continue to transform, the state. Mr. Sanya, I'm just going to hand over to you. I think we can just summarize quickly as an end, because we've covered a lot of the.
No, thank you very much, MD. I will move very, very fast. I think the functionality of SITA, we've covered quite a number of aspects there. I think in the presentation that you've just made, and I think the PSC also covered quite significantly to say how do we enhance the functionality of SITA and all of these engagements, whether it's with AXA in terms of making sure that as we devolve, sub 10 million and all of that, that we are still aligned and compliant, that we could then be able to do that. I think all the engagements that we've been doing in just enhancing that partnership with GTalk as critical partners has been important in that regard as well. So I will then move quickly. I think that the Honorable Deputy Minister spoke about the repurposing of SITA, which I think is also important in this regard. So that we have touched on as well. And maybe what is important here also is the digitalization of the common government processes, where we're really looking into really coming to having a paperless government, and we've started quite a number of these processes already to make sure that most of the common processes within government, how do you develop systems for queuing, because those are some of the common things that are happening, integration, of the various functions within the department. Those are things that we're busy with and working with the DPSA as well in making sure that we expedite that process. I think the issue around the improvement around procurement, turnaround times, I think MD, you've touched quite significantly on that in terms of the various automation processes that we're looking at, but also just to free some space with the devolvement, which we've spoken quite significantly about in making sure that as we devolve, that we then have got the right processes, the guardrails in place to make sure that we do the right thing. If we move, Tanya, to the next slide, perhaps. And perhaps here is just around the IT infrastructure modernization, because that came out very strongly. But I think that has also been touched on to say, yes, we have recently made quite a significant investment, 400 million, just to make sure that we modernize the networks, software-defined networks that will really help us progress and be able to achieve, the objectives that we're looking at. But also most of the investment here, members will be aware that when we sit with the Department of Home Affairs portfolio, we do talk a lot about this, because the minister had presented this, obviously, in terms of what is it that SITA is doing, in fighting the queues at Home Affairs. And so most of this around the stabilization of the core network and so forth, and making sure that we really minimize, if not completely, address the issue of downtimes. So that is one of those that we then looking at, making sure that we've got internet resilience, that we've brought in a second service provider there, and we should be able to bring back a lot of value from the internet perspective back to our clients, which will really help quite significantly. And I think the investment in cloud and the cloud business model itself, the infrastructure, is one of those that we've been looking at, because we believe that, moving forward with digital transformation of the departments of the state, that the cloud is going to play a very, very crucial role that will also include security issues and so forth. I think the bucket around the legacy systems, quite a lot of work that is going on in that space in making sure that we can modernize. It was one of those three, ICT trends in the country that came from the PSC report as well, that, there's proliferation of legacy systems. And so we're working on making sure that we work with the departments. We've already developed a very comprehensive repository of the various systems that we then need to look at, and have already started doing some work with a number of clients, including Dalrat and many others, to make sure that we develop this. but also just to make sure that there is integration, that we can still be able to utilize some of this old legacy, systems like mainframe and all of that, just like banks, making sure that we can bring what we call APIs that will ensure that, we can modernize and have a better user experience, but still using those engines, legacy engines that are there before we can actually be able to change them. So we've done a lot of work in that space and making sure we advise the clients as we go along. I think the issue around tariffs and pricing, very important one, but the MD, I think, has touched on that quite adequately in terms of the revision of some of these tariffs, across human resources element, some of the printing resources, most importantly, the network tariffs as well. In terms of the HR component, especially with our essential clients, like your South African Police Service, your DOD, in the human resource side, we're still working on those 2008, 2009 tariffs, meaning that the new skills that we bring in, there will always be a delta that needs to be covered in terms of the payment for those resources that we have to bring in, especially from a resource-based model. So I will pass on that one. Of course, the issue around skills, we've partnered also with a number of these OEMs and OSMs, as the MD has indicated, including now where we have even established physical, innovation centers with Microsoft, with Huawei, with Software AG, and other partners still coming on board to really make sure that we can develop and build, sufficient skills. I think the skills shortage issue has been adequately covered in the PSC report, that is an area that we need to really look at if we are to improve, service delivery. If we go to the last slide, and then again, here is just issues. I wanted to emphasize the issue around the client centricity, which we have touched on in terms of what are the various programs that we have put in place to make sure that we become a real client-centric organization. I've spoken about the engagements with GTOC, where we sit as a member of the Executive Management Committee and being able to really engage very closely there. But I think one of the key things that we have done that we need to report on is the CSI report that has come out, where we really now started going back to doing this annual, customer surveys to really get a closer feel of what the clients feel about us, and so forth, which will be similar to really the exercise that the Roundtable wanted to really engage on, just to understand what is the perception of clients about the services that we provide and so forth. So we've got that, the report is out, we've looked at it, and we are now engaging to make sure that we address and deal with the service improvement plans, to make sure that we are at par with the requirements of the clients. I think MD has already engaged, met with FOSAT, with the accounting officers, to make sure that again we've got those alignments at that level. I think I will leave it at that, honourable members, Chairperson, just for the sake of time as well. I think this would be then the last slide in terms of our presentation. Thank you so very much.
Chairperson, we're done. Back to you.
Well, thank you, Deputy Minister, and thank you to both the PSC and SITA. I would, honourable members, without waste of time, get to members who would want to make contributions, comments, questions, clarity, all that. That's the time for engagement. I would then be assisted by committee support in case I do not see any hand on my side. The Honourable Mulala, I see your hand. You are noted. Any other hand?
Putlani, Chairperson.
Okay, I note those hands. So we'll start in that. Honourable Mulala, by Honourable Putlani, and take the other stuff. Please proceed.
Thanks, and good morning, Chairperson, and good morning to the Deputy TM, and good morning to the board of SITA and the executive, led by the MD. Chair, maybe before I raise my questions, just to put a disclaimer that in our meeting, the protocols has always been that to the Deputy Minister in particular, that we allow the board to also have an input in terms of the oversight of the role they play. But sometimes we leave them out, and I'm just raising that concern as a disclaimer. However, Chair, let me welcome the presentation by the PSC and the response by SITA, though in a short term, they are providing short-term solutions, and they're saying they will come back to us in terms of their broader plans in relation to how they take SITA to the next level. Now, my questions will start with the PSC, because I think the PSC has done quite a good work, though I think it's a bit belated towards the end of our term. They are bringing this development. Perhaps they could have done that some times ago, so that by now we should be have seen changes both in SITA and various departments, because historically we've been having challenges with particularly clients departments as it relates to SITA. Because in your recommendation, part of the things, in my view, that you should have identified is that most departments are in a way trying to establish their own SITAs, and there have been these complaints for quite a number of years. But we are happy that now SITA at least is determined to address some of them. You raised an issue of ICT professionals, which are not in par with the private sector. And that would relate to the price model review. And it also relates to the funding model of SITA. In your proposal, you also spoke to Treasury funding the modernization of SITA ICT. Now, my question is the interrelation between the three in terms of your recommendation. Does it also suggest that even in client departments, the so-called mini ICT units in client departments, are they also not capacitated? And if the answer is yes, how does that then relate to SITA? How does that then relate to pricing model review? Is it an upward or a downward pricing model? I'm raising this question in relation to the complaints received by clients, because clients will always want you to be cheap. But if you modernize and have modern technology, will it be cheaper? Will that review include that you have modernized now? So the prices, obviously, ICT prices, the modernized you become, obviously, the more it will not be cheaper. So maybe if you can also help in that regard, both SITA and the PIC. Now, you have also raised the issue of the fact that funding is limited in government to modernize ICT and operations. Now, the question is, if these government clients are not able to assist SITA in terms of funding, because I know Treasury is always stringent in terms of funding. They will always look for conditions and so on in terms of funding. But client departments surely should be, in terms of your recommendation, to also play a role, because if they don't give more business to SITA, SITA will not be sustainable. So that funding should also include client departments. And then the other issue is around the procurement turnaround. This one would be referred to SITA. And this question relates to the AG's report in terms of poor controls and widespread fruitless and wasteful expenditure. That in terms of the reforms you are talking about, those reforms, in my view, should also include consequence management, because if somebody has not done his work, surely there should be consequence, particularly in relation to supply chain, because from what the AG has presented, it looks like you need to do more than just reform. I would want to hear your comment in relation to that. And I'm also, I'm impressed by your presentation in terms of system vulnerability, the issue of cybersecurity across the sector, both in client departments and in SOEs. I think that one, I'm quite impressed by your presentation. The other issue that I wanted to raise a concern about is the recommendation of PSC in terms of devolving certain procurement to departments. If you could clarify that part, because I'm afraid that we may be actually setting ourselves for failure, because the more we devolve powers to departments, the more department establish their own SITA, small SITAs, which ultimately may compromise the issue of cybersecurity nationally. So maybe if you could also clarify that, and maybe the last but one issue, on the issue of change management, the culture at SITA. I heard that you are going to appoint COO, but can you just give us an overall assessment in terms of the culture and how you effectively going to implement that change management, so that we could also have a clear glimpse of where SITA is going. And then maybe lastly, in terms of PSC, hopefully the same recommendation that you made to SITA in terms of the level of assessment, in terms of their ICT structures in departments. I hope that the same applies to the complainants, the client department, because sometimes the client departments also want some autonomy. In a way, they will always present complaints so that ultimately you devolve more powers to them. What is your level of assessment in terms of client department? Are they much lower than SITA? Are they at the same level in terms of capacity? I think those are my questions for now. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Mlala. I now recognize Honorable Budlani. Can sit.
Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, honorable members and colleagues in the meeting. Thank you so much, Chairperson, for the opportunity. And I think, Chairperson, reading this PSC Roundtable report has really broadened my understanding of what the expectation and the mandate of SITA is. And I think it is a true reflection of the state of SITA. It is a true reflection of the state of ICT infrastructure in South Africa. And it also, what I really like about it is that it also offers solutions. To the point I would like to make, Honorable Chairperson, the Presidential 4IR Commission is one of the things that have really put the use of ICT back in the spotlight. And while through the various sonars we have heard, even in the report, that the president is in support of ICT as a catalyst or an enabler for economic development, I think it is apt to note that we went for so long without a Minister of Public Administration. When we thought that was one thing, we then had changes and more changes to the Ministry of Communications in terms of the executive. I think that is also part of the things that contribute to SITA and ICT being where it is in South Africa, where we could have been further had there been some political will and putting your money where your mouth where your money is, or the other way around. Yeah. So I think it's really one of those things that we while we are high on the continent in terms of our contribution and our advancement in terms of ICT, we really could be further. Chairperson, I think the current weak state of the ICT environment implies that accounting officers and authorities have not discharged their responsibility. This is on page 35 of the report. When you read the report, you hear that chief information officers are falling through the cracks. Then it means that there needs to be proper streamlining of processes. There needs to be a proper and comprehensive and concise manner in how we handle the ICT as a value chain if we are really to reap the rewards of what the country has invested. Never mind the fact that we are only surpassing the 1% investment mark when the average across the globe is at 4%. So while we surpass in the continent, but globally we leave a lot to be desired. And this brings me to the point I would like to make, Chairperson. The recommendations, or one of the issues that the report raises, is the stringent procurement processes of the ICT with SITA. My worry, Chairperson, if I read the report correctly, is a recommendation for the procurement processes to be less stringent. We, on a weekly basis, receive reports of how the department and the various entities are looted, and where the AG has also raised issues of poor consequence management in terms of the people who loot the state of billions, especially in this sector. So how do we balance that? How do we balance making sure that there is no bottleneck in terms of acquiring ICT infrastructure, but making sure that as you deal with the red tape, systems do not fall through the cracks, where you have a situation where you do not get your return on investment? Because I'm willing to bet my bottom dollar to say we could have had better returns had there been stricter monitoring processes, had there been proper consequences and indeed prosecutions. Sorry, I'm trying to read my points. I've raised the issue about South Africa and the UN government report. Chairperson, I think what we all agree on is that ICT really has a potential to create jobs, improve the quality of lives of citizens of South Africa, and indeed change the education system in South Africa. It would have been my wish for this report to have been wider, to cover more sectors, but I do appreciate that there was issues of needing to get the report out in terms of reading, in terms of getting the report to the portfolio committee and indeed to Parliament. It would have been interesting to see what PSC recommends in terms of education. I do appreciate that they looked at Home Affairs, which is one of the departments that's people, I mean, I've had my recent experience where I applied for an ID in Gauteng, and I opted to collect in Cape Town, but there was no communication on my part. And in fact, my ID was issued just a week after, but it landed in my hands 3 months after, because there was just no communication. So I think it's the sort of things that ourselves as end users if the ICT systems do work, then the end user is less frustrated. And to my next point, Chairperson, this report really paints how government departments really do not share knowledge. It does say that government departments are working in silos. How are we going to get sufficient collaboration? How are we going to make sure that the Department of Education, not on a superficial level, but on a deeper level, is able to collaborate so that children in South Africa are able to benefit really from the ICT sector and the investment that the state is making? So it would be interesting to hear more from SITA and the department what efforts are being made to break these silos, to break these barriers that hinder the progress. I've alluded to the poor coordination where chief information officers are not always represented. Chairperson, I think if you're going to speak about things that require certain people to make decisions and they are not part of the decision making, yet you require them at an implementation stage, that just hinders the process, especially if we are receiving reports from this. We are reading from the report that the state is not competitive in terms of salaries for ICT employees. And if we are going to then sideline the very people that are going to assist in making sure that we meet our technological priorities to make sure that the needs of the citizens of the country are met, we really need to make sure that all hands are on deck. And it is my hope, Honorable Chairperson, that this document does become a living document, that it becomes an evergreen document, that, you know, a beacon that we follow. Because if issues that are raised in this document are adhered to and implemented to the T, then we could come back in a year or two and have conversations about how ICT, how SITA as a state provider of ICT has improved in terms of how it interfaces with the employees. On the issue of the legislation, Chairperson, I'm not sure if the Deputy Minister can take this committee into confidence on what the processes are in terms of amending the SITA Act, because what we are creating now, we have a new MD and a new team of people who are really ready to make sure that SITA becomes the shining light of ICT in the country. But if we do not empower them with legislation that makes their funding model, that makes the procurement processes to enable them to be more proactive, more efficient, more effective, then we will continue to sit with this problem. So what plans are there? Oversight, Great Valley. Chairperson, I think back to the point I always make, and at the risk of sounding like a broken record, our visit to the SITA head office really gave this committee a great understanding of the work that SITA does. Because I've always said that we cannot do desktop oversight as this portfolio committee and have a full appreciation of what the department, what the entities do. I do appreciate that we have less than a year left in our term, but I just want to emphasize the value, whether we do go on further oversight or this goes into a legacy report, time will tell. But I think we really should do more to better understand what the work of SITA is, what the end user is benefiting or not benefiting based on the report that we are getting from the PSC. The report also highlights how the AG found that there's poor controls and susceptibility to fraud. And we now have the issue of the Post Bank. We have the issue of SASSA, where, you know, the looting happens. And because it's a white collar crime, it is not as pronounced as the looting that we see happening in the streets. And it is exactly what SITA should be able to predict, as it were, to have processes in place to make sure that there's firewalls, that the entities and the departments are able to find value for every cent that the taxpayer is spending on the various departments. And perhaps we will get to a point where we have less of fruitless and wasteful expenditure, and we will have less of what we are seeing in the report about poor contract management. And Chairperson, while I appreciate that PSC cannot impose timelines, it would really be great for the department to say to us, based on the recommendation of the roundtable, this is what we would like, how we would like the oversight to happen. And these are the measurables that we are committing to. Because fortunately, this is a tangible project, as it were, where we are able to not just deal with ICT development and ICT as an economic driver in an abstract manner, but we are able to do so in a measurable manner, where we are able to come in a year or in a year or two to say, based on the report that you entertained at length as the portfolio committee with the other various stakeholders who were engaged in regards to this committee, to this report, this is how far we have gone. So how are we going to make sure that it is measurable, that at the end of the day, the end user finds great value in the findings of this report, that the quality of life, the quality of service for South Africans does indeed improve. I will leave it there for now, Chairperson. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Honorable Lani. Honorable, just wanted to check if there are further questions from other members that I may have not identified, as I give to both the PSC and the Deputy Minister and SITA. Because I did see on the platform that one member registered that was kicked out of the platform. So if you can also put it on the chat side, and that could be responded to in the next round. The Honorable Deputy Minister, I hope you would have understood that we are following the same pattern that we followed on the presentation. To start with the PSC to respond, and then yourself directing how you are to respond to the questions asked.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. Honorable Chairperson, in respect of the matters raised by Honorable Molala, I think, you know, when we joined, most of us as new commissioners, it's almost a new plenary of commissioners, we looked at historical issues. And so we may be, you know, apologetically out of timeline in the sixth administration, but it's because most of us have come in recently, had a review of historic issues and decided to then identify a few flagship projects which we can take forward. So, you know, that's where we are at the moment. And this is one of the flagships we chose. In terms of the costs, you know, whether the cost will be higher or lower, I think this will, you know, cost and pricing is quite a complex issue. And of course, costs will be based on a case-by-case analysis as clients require different solutions. For example, Home Affairs, Department of Health, etc., would require huge solutions, and they were like sports, arts, and recreation might require smaller solutions. However, many simple in-house solutions can save client departments substantial amount of money if we do recruit the appropriate skilled ICT professionals. You know, for example, setting up an e-leave system, an e-recruitment system, etc. These are things, if you have skilled professionals, you can actually save immense costs and do it in-house. Some of these we have done, and I say this because some of these we have done after we've appointed, you know, very recently an ICT director who looked at some things and he said, look, we don't have to necessarily go to SITA for some of these things. We can do these solutions in-house. So pricing works around that. In terms of funding, I think departments may have to look at how they reprioritize budgets and you know, identify areas of underspending, which in effect, you know, where there is underspending, they can channel these funds towards ICT. This is definitely not being done. You'll find immense amounts of underspending, and I'm not speaking about, you know, core service delivery programs. I'm talking about other programs that are not core, and then rechannel them into ICT, because that would be the foundation of also getting effective service delivery on the ground. In terms of the ICT structures of departments and whether, the capacity is the same or less as SITA, we have found through our studies that the capacity is definitely less in the departments. And of course, chief information officers that attended also did, mention this, and that's the representations we have in our report are obviously the representations of those stakeholders. So in terms of procurement processes, I think, it can be simplified without losing control, in the sense that, and that's from Honorable Bodlani. Thank you for your remarks, Honorable Member. We can simplify the processes, cut out a bit of the red tape, but it's obviously something that has to be done with proper engagement between SITA, between Treasury and the DPSA. And I think therein the plan can arise. In terms of the accounting officers not taking full responsibility or discharging their responsibilities on this, we made a comment in our plenary meeting that strat plans often speak to 4IR, but unfortunately you'll find that when we speak about 4IR, you don't find the necessary human and financial resources being allocated to it. So this is one of the challenges. Yeah, and I think, I think what's going to be really critical for us as the PSC is to see how SITA is able to pull together the plethora of stakeholders and getting us to move in one direction so that we can, and of course the PSC can definitely support where we can have, the GTO, and we can have DPSA and Treasury and working alongside us. And I think that's going to be the critical thing in terms of how we work together as stakeholders towards a common purpose. That's my response for now, Chairperson.
Thank you, PSC. Can we now take the Deputy Minister and the team of SITA as led by the board and the MT. I taking note of the hands in the next round of questions, Honorable Matson, and I think there was also Honorable Machos who's knocked out. But we'll come back. Let's just wrap up the first round of questions. Honorable the Deputy Minister.
Thank you very much, Chair. I suggest that we allow the board and the management of SITA to respond, and then I will wrap up and hand over to you. I don't know who's here, the Deputy Chair of the board. Do you want to say something?
Thank you, Honorable TM. Good morning, Honorable Chair and Honorable members and colleagues. I think from ourselves as a board, just to reiterate on what has been said, is that we, in our 1 year of sitting at the board, we have seen two approaches that can help government incorporate digital concepts into their strategies. And the first that we did was to ensure that we align the goals for digital transformation with the government's overall priorities. And I think that was the first task that we did, over and above getting the right person to lead the entity. The second one for us, Honorable Chair, was to evaluate regularly whether digital programs are performing well and adjust them to as the conditions arise or change. Of course, the technological environment changes on a daily basis, if not per second, given the innovations that are available. But I just want to touch on three things that are very critical to us that Honorable Molala has touched on. The first one is the legacy systems. One of the significant challenges for us is the presence of outdated legacy systems within various government departments. And those legacy systems, Chair, are often incompatible, with modern technology. And MD has touched on those, which then hinder the smooth transition of us digitizing the processes. Of course, we have to look at how do we then upgrade and replace those systems, which can be time consuming and also be expensive as such. But I think interdepartmental coordination, it's one of the things that has been a comment here that came out very loud, which we concur with, and we're very much aligned with that. Because when we're looking at digitizing government services, which we can call it 4IR ICT, but I'm running away from my ICT expertise here and not being technical, but that requires a coordination and collaboration among different government departments and agencies. However, there can be challenges in aligning the goals and priorities, as I've mentioned, and resources of those entities. So if you look at maybe disparate systems, differing policies, and varying levels of IT maturity. A critical one, of course, is the cybersecurity risk, that as we increase this digitization, the risk of cybersecurity threats become more pronounced. And SITA, we face those challenges of ensuring that we make sure that we have robust security measures across government systems so that we are able to protect the sensitive citizen data from unauthorized access. And this has been a critical thing and a heartbeat of ourselves as a board to say, how do we then look at the breaches and the cyber attacks and ensure that we establish and maintain a strong cybersecurity framework, which of course we acknowledge it requires continuous monitoring, updates, and the critical part is the training, because the technology is not just the technology. For us, it's a technology that enables us to do our work. Maybe last I'll touch on the issue of skills and capacity that we have looked at, was to develop and maintain the necessary skills and capacity within SITA and other government entities or our clients, which is very crucial for us in making sure that we successfully digitize. However, there may be a shortage of IT skills, which is not only a national problem, it's a global crisis as technology evolves, especially in specialized areas such as cybersecurity and data analytics. And as SITA, we understand that we need to invest in training and upskilling programs so that we are able to also bridge the digital gap and deliver the services. The issue around procurement, Honorable Chair, and maybe vendor management, we often rely on external vendors to provide technology solutions and services. However, those challenges that may arise in the procurement processes include the complex procurement regulations, which then delays procurement cycles and difficulty in managing those relationships that we have. So MD has touched on that to say this is something that we look at and we are working on it. And as he has mentioned as well, that within his office, he's now having a PMO, somebody or a project management officer who's going to be able to ensure that there is that connectivity and not working in silos within the systems itself, so that we are able to address some of the challenges that we are having there. I think the critical one for us was the change management, which Honorable Botlana has also touched on. And we know that when we implement digital transformation initiatives, it requires significant changes in processes and systems. And of course, the critical one for us was the organizational culture, because resistance to change, lack of awareness, and inadequate change management strategies can, of course, impede the successful adoption of technologies that we want to bring in. So this is something that we looked at, but I will hand over to MD just to touch on some of the comments and questions that the members have raised, which we welcome and appreciate, because they are very much aligned with our heartbeat, with what has been keeping us awake, Chair, over the last 12 months of being in the board. But for us in addressing these challenges, we know that it requires a holistic approach involving collaboration with various stakeholders, private sector partners, and of course, even civil society, because it is crucial for SITA to develop a comprehensive strategy to prioritize investment and also continuously adapt to emerging technologies and evolving needs so that we successfully digitize government for the sake of our citizens. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. If I may continue just to cover the aspects that may not have been covered. Honorable Mulala spoke around the procurement turnaround times. So Chair, the lack of automation leads to the poor controls and opportunities for nefarious ends to come into the process. And that's why you'll see the AG's report reflect on poor controls and also fruitless and wasteful expenditure. Additionally, there's also the issue of poor contract management. All of these things can be fundamentally traced to the lack of automation in that space. And that's why we've mentioned earlier that we have partnered with Microsoft to have the full end-to-end procurement value chain automated, from front to back. And this is something that we will be doing in the next 2 quarters. We have started the process already, so the next 2 quarters is in starting from 1 May. In terms of making sure that the controls are built in to this automation, we are implementing what we call a parallel audit process. So what this means is as we implement, we're having a parallel audit happen at the same time to ensure that every single step of the implementation is audited to ensure that it is compliant. We also have a workshop with the AG where the AG has offered to come and help us to look at the various controls, because part of the function that the AG does, besides just being the auditor for the state, they also do provide advisory services. And so we are working with them to ensure that we can look at our various controls as we automate them into the system with Microsoft to ensure that they are built in from the beginning. And this will also include the issue of consequence management to say, when you now do try to circumvent the process that's built into the process, what are those consequence management processes that we follow? And that's part of the reason why we are also bringing, we are strengthening our executive leadership team. The role of the head of governance, risk and compliance is something that we are filling shortly to ensure that this is something that can be driven at an executive level, so that the issue of consequence management and the like can be done and handled at an executive level. And this is just some of the short-term things, Honorable Mulala, that we are doing. From a long-term perspective, what we're actually investigating, I didn't want to talk about it here because it's a long-term plan, but it's actually AI-based procurement. But the point is, you actually have to start with automation before you can go to AI-based procurement. AI-based procurement is actually a version of procurement where you can have the entire process not be driven by any human intervention. So right now, as you automate the bid evaluation and the like, that will still require the relevant level of governance and committees, etc., executive bid adjudication committees and the like. But in the future, we're envisaging an AI-based procurement environment where the whole process can be automated to an extent that there's only very few intervention points where a human is in the loop. So that is something that we're working towards. But step number 1 is the automation of the basic procurement value chain from front to back. The issue that you've raised around the development of procurement and whether we are setting ourselves up for failure in terms of then delegating those powers away back into departments. And as we know from the PSC, because the PSC report, and what I like about it is it's not just covering SITA, but there's actually widespread weaknesses across various departments as well with regards to ICT. It's not just a SITA problem. In fact, if you look at capability, I would say SITA by far has the strongest capability, compared to that of the departments. And that is why in the guidelines that we are developing, and again, we are collaborating with the AG and Treasury, is to ensure that we put controls in place and very clear guidelines that can say, how do you do this process? What kinds of approvals do you have to have in place for that to happen? And then, what exactly is the role of SITA in that process? So right now, the types of exemptions that have been given in the past, and this is what we are reviewing, have been very, so a department gets given an exemption, they go do something on their own. I'll give the example in the Office of the Chief Justice. They go do something on their own, then something goes wrong. They realize this is not how they should have done it, or they get into a cybersecurity issue, and then they come back to SITA later to go, look, we've done this, we want to come back to you to work with us to help us to close those gaps. So we want to prevent that. We've done that in the past. That model has not worked. So we're looking at a new model that says, even as you devolve, SITA will still be involved for the mandatory services to ensure that from a cybersecurity, from a networks and hosting perspective, that the guardrails are there, that we allow that seamless and fast sort of innovation to happen without delegating those powers away. So this is something, Chair, that we don't take lightly. It is not something that we are doing willy-nilly. It is receiving a lot of attention from our lawyers, from the AG, from Treasury, and also in collaboration with the department as well, to ensure that we can write those guidelines very, very clearly. With the next issue around change management, and you mentioned the issue of the overall assessment of the culture and how we are sort of dealing with that. Honorable Molala, there's two things that our clients, in all the conversations I've had, with the various DGs, and I've gone from the Western Cape all the way up to Gauteng and Limpopo in terms of speaking to various DGs that are situated there. And there's two things really. One is price, and two is speed. And we need to make sure that the culture that we build within SITA responds to those two things. One, if you talk about the issue of speed, it talks to a culture of client centricity. I don't want to just pay lip service to client centricity, which is why we are establishing all these various forums. There's various plaques. You walk around the SITA building, you'll find various plaques that talk about client centricity, but in our actual processes, they're not client centric. And that's why we are bringing that back, not just paying lip service, but actually in the process of how we run the organization. Then the next one is around price, where I've mentioned, around, making sure that we have the right skills as SITA to ensure that we can deliver things at speed, because when you do that, that's when the price is lower. And I think there are models that we've seen that are very successful. And I heard Honorable Botlani speak about further, portfolio committee visits. I would like to recommend the SITA Cape Town office. I visited them 2 weeks ago. We had a partnership with the University of Western Cape where we brought in around 100 students over a number of years, 3 years now. And I met with all of them. And I can tell you that office is the future of what SITA is going to be. We partner with universities, we bring in young people as interns, and they've done amazing things. I mean, they've developed the entire inmate management system for the Western Cape, in the Department of Correctional Services, something that is done at a fraction of the cost of what at the national level was done with the other providers that I will not mention for sensitivity reasons. So that is the future of how we're going to change the culture of the organization, is making sure that we can bring in young people, partner with the universities, and bringing them into the organization so that we can get that refreshed thinking and partnering them with the people that have been here for a while to ensure that there is that skills handover. And I must say, if I can recommend to the committee, you must visit the SITA Cape Town office. It's an example of what we're trying to build in this organization. Honorable Botlani, you mentioned the issue around collaboration and how do we facilitate that. And one of the concepts that we're looking at is, this concept of the CRO. In SITA, we have a department called technical consulting. And what technical consulting does is effectively what I would call pre-sales. So before anything before any tasking, before a government order, before any of that, what we are supposed to be doing as SITA is playing an advisory role, where we go and meet with the various GTOs and even DGs, look at the environment, look at the various infrastructure, and provide advisory services, in terms of what they need to do going forward, help them to build their digital strategies. And I think that's a role that we want to expand. Currently, this role is not expanded to a point where it can cover all of the GTOs. It is a role that is deployed on a need and a case-by-case basis. But in terms of our new SITA, where SITA plays a much more coordinative, much more advisory role to the state, we want to ensure that we bring in this concept of the CRO. And we have a young lady, Homoja, that leads that department that is excellent, well-trained, well-skilled, well-educated, that will be leading that fast and building that capacity that can match every single GTO, effectively having somebody from SITA that is their advisor on a full-time basis to ensure that they can build their strategies, give them the advisory that they need in terms of how to transform that landscape. And I think in that way, we can have a much more coordinated approach to transforming the state than it currently is right now, where things are currently very siloed. Honorable Chair, I think we will stop there. I think the rest of the questions were covered by the Deputy Chairperson of the Board of SITA. I will hand over back to the Deputy Minister for any summarization. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. And I think, Chair, most of the questions, the colleagues from SITA have responded to them, just few ones which are remaining. There was a question from Honorable Botlani on the recommendation by the PSC to amend the SITA Act. Our response, Honorable Botlani, is to indicate that we have already started with that process. As I said, that the minister is looking into the question of repurposing of SITA, for which there has been some progress. And that progress includes the fact that there's already been a development of a business case, which has been consulted upon. I think DBSA has given some inputs, and the department is busy working on the inputs that have been received and trying to develop a response. The intention is to respond to most of the issues that came out of this process of the roundtable. But also, Chair, we intend to repurpose and reposition SITA to become a state digital services company that will be able to provide care of services to government and to make sure that whatever shortcomings that have been identified both in the past and in this roundtable report are attended to. I must also say, Chairperson, that following the determination by Cabinet, the minister is in the process of setting up, not really setting up, but convening an interministerial committee, because it's a decision of Cabinet that there must be an interministerial committee on digitization to address the modernization of ICT infrastructure across government and to attend to issues of reskilling. And so the minister is already given directives that that interministerial committee needs to be convened so that we can attend to all of the issues that has to do with the modernization of the ICT infrastructure across government. But otherwise, Chair, the rest of the issues have been addressed. I must also say that the issues around procurement challenges are also a concern to the department. And as a result, we are also working with SITA to address the inordinate delays in procurement matters is something that we are addressing, because we want to repurpose SITA to become a provider of choice where the clients, which are the departments, will continue to receive services, not because it's per obligation of legislation, but because they are being given value for money by SITA. So that's the work that both in the department and in the ministry are doing. But I think, Chair, that concludes our responses, unless if there are further questions. I would like to take this opportunity and hand back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Minister, I'll now take Honorable Matsone, Honorable Majosi to follow, and then take further questions. Honorable Matsone.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chairperson, please allow me to keep my video off to strengthen my bandwidth. Unfortunately, I'm having load shedding at the moment, and it's making it very difficult to keep the video on. Chair, I kept quiet in the first round because I felt that it was best for me to hear answers that were coming through. And as you know, when we had our presentation a few weeks ago, the one department that did greatly improve my mood and give me great hope was SITA. And I said as much when we did our budget speeches our responses to the APPs as well. And once again, I'm glad to see that we have people who are really in the business know-how running this particular department, and it certainly does look like there will be a great improvement. But Chair, I do want to, and also Chair, allow me, if I may, also to make what is perhaps a strange comment, but something that for me, which is very unusual, and that is to thank the Deputy Minister for being on hand. I'm not used to having a minister or a Deputy Minister who is so eager to be in a portfolio meeting. So that to me is very refreshing, and I find that a very good thing, and I think that that's applaudable. Chair, there are a couple of things that have worried me, but have not been answered, and I've kept quiet because, as you know, I am new to this particular committee, so I wait and I listen and I learn as we go along. But Chair, what I can tell you is this: as you know, I was very involved in the whole issue of state capture. When it came down to the unraveling of state capture, the naming of state capture, and as you know, the inquiry into ESCOM, for example, of state capture. And when I laid the many charges that I laid, so many of them related to a lack of adherence to the PFMA. And what worries me greatly is that this morning I'm hearing again, even though questions were asked, I don't think the answers that I'm being given are sufficient when it comes to how we adhere to the PFMA, which is probably one of the most important pieces of legislation that we have in terms of stopping any form of corruption. And adhering to making sure systems are managed and operated correctly. And we're looking for shortcuts around the PFMA. And I think that leads us into very dangerous territory. I did notice one line where SITA especially said that they were being held back sometimes on a financial year basis by the PFMA because of issues that had arisen. So my question, Chair, is how exactly do we intend to, as a Department of Communications and Digital Technology, together with our stakeholders, for example, SITA, how do we get around problems that we have in the PFMA without breaking or in any way bending the rules of the PFMA, because that could lead to a very dangerous situation where we see unintended or maybe intended, we don't know, forms of corruption unfolding, because the PFMA is there for a very good reason. And as we know, after state capture, the PFMA must now be adhered to more stringently than ever before. And I'd like us to delve a little bit more into the PFMA and how we can adhere to the PFMA without holding SITA, for example, to ransom for one whole financial year. Then we've just heard in an answer from SITA now that AI, artificial intelligence, is something that is becoming more and more prevalent, not only in South Africa, but around the world. And that is inevitable as we move along with technology. Now, in a country that has a very high unemployment rate, AI is quite a scary, well, yes, I suppose it is quite scary for people whose jobs are going to become obsolete. But we also, I don't think, have realized the technology and the computer literacy rates in a country where AI could be taking over certain assignments. I, for example, feel that things like motor vehicle licenses, and I use just this as an example, I think that we should have a row of 30 machines where humans can go, and I say humans because we're talking about AI, so I don't want to confuse artificial intelligence with human intelligence. 30 computers are set up in an area where you walk up to the computer, you punch in your data, and within a matter of 20, 30 seconds, your data has been processed and your card disk is spat out. And that would then mean no long queues, no long waiting periods, and making life a lot easier. But how far along do we think we are with the kind of computer literacy rates that we would need for AI to become viable in terms of assisting various departments? And where do we start the training to get AI programmers? Because once again, I see university graduates, etc., not really that as interested in AI, computer programming, and people think that they have to be these absolute Einstein-style geniuses to go into the sector. And as someone that talks as someone who finds herself academically very average, I am exceptionally good with my computer skills, if I say so myself. It's something that's something that's always interested me, and it's a forte of mine. And but it worries me that we aren't pushing in our schooling. The way the world is moving into the 4IR and the fourth industrial revolution, which will be completely technological. How many children have access to these computer systems that we can start teaching our young South Africans and our young learners from a very early age? I have seen firsthand a 3-year-old learn how to use an iPad better than I can within the space of a few minutes, which is slightly concerning because it means that the 3-year-old landed up buying a whole lot of games for kids online without me realizing. But that was my fault for not keeping an eye on my godchild. But children learn very fast, and this is something that can be of great value that we can add to our curriculums. But I don't see it, and I don't hear it being advertised as much as it possibly could. And then my very last point, Chair, if I may, it's just on the cybersecurity. Cybersecurity in South Africa, and it's been discussed today, remains a very big problem. But it's not just a problem that we have in South Africa. It's now, we realize, become an international problem. And I would just like to find out from both the department and from SITA themselves, are we having intercontinental and intergovernmental discussions about worldwide cybersecurity? Because I've gone to many conferences like the IPU, and I once attended a digital conference about digitizing Africa that was held in Tanzania, which was around 2011, 2012. I'm not sure which year it was. And countries weren't really speaking to each other in terms of how we look after. We were looking after our own cybersecurity, but we weren't looking after cybersecurity as a whole. And as we know, the world is becoming a village. So I would just like to know what kind of interactions we're having with international organizations and governments when it comes to securing cybersecurity. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Matsone. Honorable Machozi, you are recognized.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson, Honorable Members and TM. No, mine is, I'm partly responded to by the CEO of SITA, but we welcome the information that we've received. I think other honorable members have alluded more on that. And I don't know, because my network was giving me problems, if maybe this question was addressed as well, because even when we ask other departments, Chairperson, that why are the ICT system not in place? Why is the Department of ICT not? And then they will start blaming on SITA, that SITA is the one that is helping them and in developing and doing that. So I would want to know if maybe SITA is getting any challenges within these departments, because I mean, in the police department, we know that we are reported to that SITA is the one that is taking care of their digital side of systems. So we would really want to know if SITA is experiencing challenges. I did hear the CEO speak in terms of other departments, and when they now knock on the walls, they will then come back to SITA and say, this is our challenge, and then can you please help us with this? So that is the only question I wanted to check, Chairperson, if SITA is helping these departments and what challenges are they experiencing within the department, so that it doesn't come back to SITA all the time, that SITA is the one that is giving them problems, because that is what we receive all the time. But we welcome the presentation, and at least now we've got a clear view of what exactly is happening. And it is correct, Chair, that a department must have an in-house ICT, and also that will also create employment, but also it will put all systems in place for all departments to be able to run, because ICT is the most important in a department. So because that is where you capture all your data and information that you need. So in terms of SITA, I would just like to know, are they receiving any challenges from these departments that they are helping with ICT and so forth? Because then we must get a clear picture. I was partly responded to, but I think maybe getting more info would help. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Machozi. Is that in your end, Honorable Mlala?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Maybe just as a follow-up on the questions I raised, but maybe before I go there, I would like just to maybe also welcome the issue raised by Honorable Mazzoni in relation to state capture. In this instance, the SITA capture and lack of adherence to PFMA. But I would like SITA to respond, because in many instances, corruption is always looked at from a public perspective and less said about the private sector. And I saw in your presentation, SITA, that you were talking about partnerships with the private sector. I would like you to put that into context in relation to how you're going to do the checks and balances, both in terms of the issue of corruption or SITA capture in the context of Honorable Mazzoni, and in terms of transformation, because we also need to see how those checks and balances will help us transform this sector, because it's predominantly dominated by the private sector. So in your partnership with big techs, I think if you can just make a comment on that, I would be comfortable. And then the second issue is that the minister in his budget speech has spoken about the 6 billion that is to address the issue that the portfolio committee has been raising of connectivity, particularly in deep rural areas. And we even further said that preferably the South African Connect approach of identifying schools, clinics, community centers, and so on, so that our people can have the ability to, particularly young people, to have access to applications of jobs and be creative, innovative in a way. So I would also like you to comment on that and how far is the process. And I know the MD is a man of commitment to particular timelines. Perhaps if you can just give us an idea in terms of that 6 billion, because our interest is ensuring that there's connectivity in rural areas. And then maybe the last issue that I think I would also need a comment on in terms of the aging and absolute ICT infrastructure and how the possible cost of that, because in terms of your modernization, do you see that having SITA being sustainable financially, what will be the impact of that if you don't have, for instance, insufficient support in terms of your engagement with Treasury and various client departments? Because I think it will require you a lot to get a lot of support in that area. And if you could just do some estimate, if you don't have them for now, but maybe when you do the presentation on the SITA of tomorrow, also you can indicate in that regard so that we know for sure that definitely we need to modernize. I think those are the last remaining questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Honorable Mlala. I will now, as members would have listened, the points are more on the SITA, so not much of the PSC in this second round of questions. So which therefore means Deputy Minister and your team will then direct on how you are responding to these questions. And then from there, we will wrap up on this item.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to honorable members for the questions. Let me invite the MD, and then I'll come and address just a couple of issues, maybe even one, mindful of time, Chair. MD.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Minister and Honorable Chair, for all the questions received from the members. I'll start with Honorable Mazzoni on the question that you've asked around a comment in the presentation around being held back by PFMA. And perhaps the wording of that is maybe not, maybe unfortunate. I think maybe let me just clarify and just state exactly what the intention is there. Number one, the intention is not in any way, shape, or form to flout or to short circuit or to circumvent the PFMA process. That's not the intention whatsoever. The intention, as we automate it, to ensure that we can build in as much of the procurement process in an as automated a way as possible, so that we can facilitate adherence to that policy. The second thing that as SITA, I think, is a bit of an own goal is we don't have a gap between, or a procedure that interprets the PFMA and contextualizes it to the organization. So if you go to many state-owned companies, there will be their PFMA, and then there'll also be what they call the PPM, which is the Procurement Procedures Manual, which then interprets the PFMA and contextualizes it to the organization so that you are clear in how you operationalize that. That is one of the gaps that we have identified. And that's why you'll often hear comments like being held back by the PFMA. I think that part of the biggest challenges is that we've not contextualized it with the proper procedures manual for SITA. Now, this is not to say that there's no procurement policies and operating procedures. Of course, they are there, but a PPM is a bridging document that is quite critical in ensuring that you can move with speed in terms of your procurement processes. So that's one of the things that we need to look at as part of our policy universe review process, which is underway. The next one around AI, and the impact on jobs, and how do we unleash that power that can lie in that if the computer literacy rates are very low and the like. And I must say, this is an area I'm very passionate about. My PhD is indeed in AI. I'm a published author. You can go read about my publications in the area of AI, if you go to Google Scholar and the like. So this is an area I'm very, very passionate about. And one thing I can say, just to clear up a misconception, AI does indeed displace some jobs, but it also creates opportunities for many other jobs. And I think often we focus on the jobs it displaces, and we don't focus enough on the jobs it does create. And I can tell you, members, that the opportunity and the upside is far higher than the downside that we have. And I think our task as accounting officers is to ensure that we can take our people along in this journey with respect to skills transformation. That is why at SITA, we've got something that we call a WSP, a work skills plan, where we train not just citizens or people that work for SITA, but also we train youths, SMMEs, and others in collaboration with the MIC SITA to ensure that they are skilled in this way, to ensure that they can take us to the future with respect to the area of AI. So this is something that we do. We, in fact, it's funny that the Honorable Mazzoni member mentioned this, but we actually have a hackathon with MIC SITA that's happening, I think, around the 22nd of May, where again, we're inviting youths to come and participate around this area of artificial intelligence, because we believe that is the future pathway that we need to take in terms of adding economic value to this ICT sector in the country. The next issue that Honorable Mazzoni mentioned is around cybersecurity and whether there is some intercontinental, and I suppose I can add international discussions around this. Again, I would like to say wholeheartedly, yes, there is. In fact, in the next couple of weeks, we've been invited by the US consulate for a roundtable discussion on the issue of cybersecurity, and SITA is one of the keynote speakers at that, to share lessons from the US, lessons from South Africa, and how we can improve in terms of how that actually gets done. So there is definitely, collaboration that does happen. We do send our people that run cybersecurity to international conferences and sometimes conferences within the continent where we can share, around the issue of cybersecurity. I do agree, however, that the collaboration and sharing from an interdepartmental perspective, I think that is something that is lacking. When I was engaging with the various DGs and asking around the issue of cybersecurity, one could sense that it is something that is not necessarily sitting at the right ExCo level in terms of receiving attention, understanding what it means, and importantly, what to do to close the gaps that have been identified. Each sort of GTO and each area is sort of dealing with it on their own. And I think there's more work that needs to be done, especially as SITA, to ensure that we can create that collaboration interdepartmentally around this issue. I think there is a shortcoming. That is why in our APP that we presented in the previous portfolio committee, we have committed to working with various departments to evaluate a number of government sites from an ICT cybersecurity assessment perspective and identify the gaps that are there, and then assess the departments in terms of how to close them. So that is something that we have identified as a gap and that we will be addressing. Honorable Majosi, you mentioned the issue of challenges, if there are any challenges that SITA experiences when it comes to various government departments as we try to execute on our mandate. And And to be honest with you, Honorable Majosi, you raised a very important issue, and most likely on its own could have its own PSC report, if I'm being very honest, in terms of the quality of GTOs that we have across various government departments, the unclear requirements that you get when you engage the various individuals, sometimes changing requirements. So there are definitely issues from that side as well that do impact on the delivery. So it is not a one-sided thing that can just, where people can just say, it's just SITA. And I think it's a popular thing to say because it's a popular excuse. And for us, they are clients. So it's very difficult for me to go and say, no, it's my client's fault. I have to always ensure that I protect the clients and try and help them where we can. But there are definitely issues there that are perhaps beyond SITA to assist. And maybe this is where we can say, we need help from the likes of the PSC to help us as well to look at what can be done to improve that environment from a GTO perspective across the various departments. What we are doing as SITA, as I've mentioned before, is looking at this concept of the CRO. So ensuring that our technical consulting team, the pre-sales team that really provides the advisory, can partner well with every GTO to ensure that by the time there's a tasking or there's a government order, that collaboration and advisory has actually happened. Because we've seen in cases where that advisory and collaboration between SITA and government departments has worked well, delivery has been very good. And in fact, the client requirements have been met and clients have been very impressed. I gave the example of the Regional Commissioner of Correctional Services in the Western Cape. It's a collaborative effort. We used young people that were interns from the University of the Western Cape, worked with the Department of Correctional Services and built a solution that is a fraction of the cost of what you'll find in the industry. But that only happens when that advisory and collaboration happens. I think part of the challenge is in many cases, that advisory and collaboration does not happen. And you simply receive a tasking letter that says, I want X, Y, Z because I need to discharge my budget within a specific financial year. And I think that leads to many, many challenges. I think fixing that part of the value chain can solve probably half of all the problems that we have in terms of ICT delivery. So this is why we are focusing on that technical consulting function to beef that up. Because if I can advise by the time every single tasking comes to SITA, if our team can have had a word in advising and making sure that things are done properly, the requirements are clear and the like, I think it will smoothen a lot of those processes where right now there's not perhaps enough of that actually happening. So we're trying to beef up from our side in terms of having that CRO. But I do admit that further work, which is probably beyond the mandate of SITA, needs to be done to look at capacitating appropriately the government departments and their GTO environments. Honorable Malala, you asked an important question around state capture in general and how we are working with the private sector to ensure that there's and ensuring that there are the various checks and balances to ensure that there's no, shall I say, another form of capture that may occur. I suppose is what you are alluding to as we partner with the private sector. So what we are doing, Honorable Malala, and you'll see this more clearly when we come back with our detailed presentation, is the following: is we want to move from being, a reactive organization. So in the same way where I've said, when it comes to the issue of clients, we want to be more proactive and advise every single one of them. We want to do the same thing with the private sector. We'll be much more proactive rather than just waiting for a tender to come from a client and then we publish something and we go out. Because by that time, you don't know what conversations have happened between, the various requesting individuals and the people that end up winning the tender, and even people within the procurement value chain. What we are saying is, to circumvent that, we want to make sure that we are proactive in our engagement. So we want to proactively vet various private sector solutions and publish them in what we call the SITA marketplace. So I'll give an example of video conferencing solutions because that was relevant in the time of COVID. And I think everyone here can be able to understand. Imagine a world where SITA had engaged Microsoft Teams. We've engaged Zoom. We've engaged Google Meet and various other providers that provide these services, and to vet them proactively for cybersecurity, for where their data is hosted, and whether they meet the various policies and government requirements that we have from an ICT perspective within this country, and then made them available in the marketplace. what that creates is it creates a condition where now clients can competitively interact with those solutions that have been pre-vetted and to be able to decide which one works the best for them. Now, the other benefit is when it comes to the issue of SMMEs, if there's and I'll use a hypothetical example here, but a RC connection that has been developed that does something similar, you are now also able to pre-vet that solution and help that SMME to publish that in the marketplace. So now next time the GTO comes and says, I'm looking for a video conferencing solution, they're not only confronted with the big tech solutions, but they can also find some of the SME developed solutions where SITA has said, we have looked at their cybersecurity, we've looked at various things, and perhaps even worked with them to close some of those gaps so that you can put them on equal footing. And we believe in that way you can stimulate economic growth. Because if the price is cheaper, the solution is developed locally, and it works just as well, one would like to believe that the clients would actually start to choose that as well, as much as they choose some of the big tech solutions. So we believe this model that we're pivoting towards, or we're playing on both sides of the economy, on the supply side as well on the demand side, will lead to stimulating economic growth and industry transformation, especially participation of SMMEs, because we're putting them on equal footing with some of the big tech players. Honorable Malala, you also touched on the issue of the 6 billion rand that was mentioned in the minister's budget vote speech around modernization with regards to broadband. You also touched on a point around a firm timeline on this one. On the issue of timeline, I'm not going to be able to commit on one here because this is a very new development and the team are still working together to put a thorough project plan around how we can execute on this appropriately. So it's not something that I can give, unfortunately, to you right now. You're correct. We do like to commit where it makes sense, and we can, and we have done that in the past, and we'll continue to do so. But on this one, it is a bit too early for me to give you a firm time to go, this is exactly how it's going to be done. However, having said that, we have started working with the team on high-level planning to understand how we can approach this. One of the things that we're looking at is making sure that this is broken up into various regions so that you don't just issue a 6 billion rand tender. As you can imagine, that can attract a lot of interest, some positive and some negative as well. And so we're looking at how we can ensure that we can package it in such a way that we have a regional approach where you can look at a focus on a specific region, perhaps look at an order of around 400 million rand, where you can then deploy that. We also want to make sure that in those contracts, we have enough clauses that talk to SMME development and upliftment of previously disadvantaged persons so that they can participate in that project from a involvement perspective, not just to come and do the menial work, but also to add the value adding work so that they are also upskilled to be able to deliver going forward with regards to that. And by the way, we're not just saying this willy-nilly. We have 2 projects that we're running right now, one in the Western Cape with the Broadband 2.0 project, and one in Gauteng with the GBN Phase 3 project. Both are multi-billion rand programs where SITA is involved with the Western Cape government and the Gauteng government in rolling out of broadband. So this is something that we have experience in doing. And even in those 2, we have involved SMMEs. We've ensured that hundreds of youths have been trained and that Black SMMEs have been involved in that process to actually roll out the fiber, roll out the various APNs that have to be installed in the various government buildings. So this is something that we have experience in, and we're pulling from that knowledge in this project for the 6 billion rand as well. The last comment, Honorable Malala, was around the aging infrastructure and whether us upgrading the various infrastructure might cause an issue of lack of sustainability from a SITA perspective. And I must admit, this is something that I have seen as I've joined. I'll give you one example. We have roughly around 6 to 8 data centers across the country. I'll give you the exact number. But to upgrade one data center to be tier 3, so tier 3 meaning that it's got dual redundancy from a supply perspective, network connectivity perspective, that you can use renewables as well as diesel generators and the like, so that you're not impacted by load shedding. Just to upgrade one is 1.5 billion rand. We were looking at the business at the CapEx business case 3 weeks ago when I joined, and so we don't have that CapEx. All of SITA's CapEx is only about 1 billion maximum. It's only about 1 billion in a given year, and that's on a good year. And so there is a significant CapEx and funding challenge that one has to look at. We busy putting together all of this as part of our new strategy around funding. What funding do we require to ensure that we can look at modernization across the entire landscape? And that's just data centers. I haven't touched on the network infrastructure. We've already invested 400 million, as you heard, but we need more investment to ensure that we can have that network proliferating across the country. So that is definitely a concern that we are working on to put together that funding case, if I can call it that, to ensure that we can address the issue of aging infrastructure. And by the way, this is where the private sector angle was coming from as well, to say, can we co-invest where it makes sense with the private sector? Can we look at some of these data centers to go, yes, there must be national key points, but can we have them managed by, with assistance with some private sector players to help us to lower the cost of running them and the like? So we're going to look at various options, Honorable Molala, to ensure that we come up with a proper proposal that we can take to Treasury to go, look, this is the plan. This is what we believe is a necessary roadmap to help alleviate the challenge of aging infrastructure. Colleagues, I want to stop there. I believe we've addressed all of the issues. Maybe Deputy Minister, if there's anything you would like to add in terms of summary, I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, Dr. Babaso, I think you have eloquently addressed all the questions that members have raised. I think if you listen to the discussion by honorable members, they reflected broadly on the ICT sector and not only on SITA. And I think this talks to the exciting nature of this sector that we are in, which would like to call it, which we broadly refer to it as the digital economy. That it's a sector of the economy that is growing rapidly, that is changing our lives as we know them through this emerging new technology. So if you listen to the discussion, because it was not really the question, it was more of the comments that members were raising, and I think they were appreciating that this environment is dynamic, this environment is growing, and therefore we need to keep up with the pace. And as we do that, we need to make sure that we don't leave anybody behind, that we address issues of the digital divide. So all of those issues are the issues that we assist with on a daily basis in the department. Just on the issue of the 6 billion that was raised, I think maybe the MD did clarify the 6 billion that is for the National Broadband Project of SITA, for which she says that they are working on it. So it should not be confused with the SA Connect project, because that's a separate project for which this financial year we've received 1.3 billion allocation from National Treasury. So this is a different project that I think we've briefed members on, but it is part, I must say that it is part of the ambition that we have in the department, that would like to make sure that 80% of South Africans have got access to the internet in the next 3 years. Through this project, working with the other partners, through the universal service obligations that we have as part of the optioning of the spectrum, that would like to cover 80% of, make sure that there's connectivity. So the SA Connect project is the flagship project that we want to ensure connectivity. We want to bridge the digital divide. We want to address many of the issues that the Honorable Mazoni was talking to. So I was just saying that it is a bit different from the National Broadband Project, which has been, which 6 billion has been earmarked there. I think that is a SITA project. But lastly, just to say, we agree with you, Honorable Mazoni. In actual fact, as you know, that the President has developed an action plan to address the recommendations arising from the Chief Justice Zondo's Commission. We are also working on that in the department around the issue of procurement reform, so that the area of procurement has to be attended to in such a way that it does not create possibilities for what we have witnessed in the past, the pillaging of the resources of the state. So it's something that we are working on, and I'm sure as and when we this progress, we will report on it. But we absolutely agree with Honorable Mazuni that we must do everything else to make sure that we don't have a repeat of what happened during those days of state capture. And SITA is an entity that does facilitate a lot of procurement. It's an entity that requires a lot of those procurement reforms, some of which the MD has spoken to. But we are working on comprehensively attending to the a plan as shared with the nation by the President. I think, Chair, would like to leave it at this and hand over to yourself to continue with the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, the Honorable Deputy Minister and the team for the responses in the second round of questions. Honorable members, second, I take the opportunity to thank the PSC for having agreed that as they do their work, that post that they would come before the portfolio committee. And I think in the engagements, they themselves should be satisfied that there's commitment from the side of the portfolio committee to ensure that the recommendations as they have forwarded them are monitored from the point of us doing our oversight work over the over SITA and the department that works with SITA through its entity oversight unit. Of course, I take it that then members agree that we note that welcome the presentation from the portfolio side. But secondly, we agree with the observations that have been made, findings of the report, and that we own up to the recommendations as now matters that the portfolio committee will be seized with. And I'm sure members would also agree that the responses that we have received from SITA are a reassurance that one, they have taken note kindly of the concerns that come out of the report and what is being proposed as a way of looking at solutions, and not take that as part of advancing the proposal of SITA. Of course, taking caution to some of the concerns that members would have had, be it as to the adherence of the law in terms of the PFMA in managing devolutions and so on, but as well as, of course, endorsing the proactive step also from the Auditor General of South Africa's office to proactively work with SITA so as to avoid any problems of non-compliance going forward. But more importantly, in particular, to the ministry, that is the one that approves exemptions that get applied for, that you would not do that as advised by the recommendations. You would not do that in a way
that collapses what needs to happen with regard to SITA changing gear, because it is those exemptions that may also undermine what members have recognized as a positive in that SITA has been able to sustain itself. With many of the big clients leaving SITA, it can also lead to that collapse. So I think the point is really to use that discretion, putting first and foremost the legal obligation put on SITA to be the ICT company of state, which should be the first preference, even by state institutions, not only because of that law, but because the repurposing brings that capacity to help close even the other gaps. And I take it also that the members are agreed to this thing that the PSC and SITA, as articulated by the MD, may need to really work on the part of capacity in the other departments as it relates to GTOs and so on. And that's something to look at. So with that, we should be able to agree. That's the way we close on that point, as we would be going to the next item on the minutes of the committee. With that, thanks a lot to the PSC and the department, as well as SITA. If you would want to leave the platform, you would be free to do so as we get to the minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. Thank you, Honorable Members. We will leave the platform now as the PSC. Thank you.
Thank you. I see a hand at Honorable Tambo.
No, thank you very much, Chairperson. And I would beg your indulgence because... Chair?
Yes, Honorable Tambo, you can proceed. I didn't see your hand, sorry.
Oh, I thought you had noted my hand, Chair. Apologies.
Yeah, yes, I'm saying the reason I'm giving you is because I didn't see your hand before making that submission.
No, I accept the closing remarks, Chair. I'm raising on a different issue, and I hope I can beg your indulgence in that regard. Due to the ongoing load shedding crisis, there are matters that we do tend to miss when it comes to deliberations, and in the initial stages of the meeting this morning, I was a victim of that. I just wanted to check. I see that we received a letter of request from the department regarding the briefing by the department on the SAPO bailout conditions and their deliverables. I don't know if any resolution was made in that regard before I make a comment. So in case, that's why I asked for indulgence, Chair. In case I missed those deliberations, I wanted to get a sense of clarity. What was the resolution regarding the request by the department on the deferment of those deliberations on the bailout of the South African Post Office? Because I'm aware that we have about 2 meetings left in the term, and the letter didn't specify any specific date to deliberate on the state of SAPO. And if I'm not mistaken, I'll be corrected if I'm mistaken, we were supposed to have weekly briefings. I see the chair has left the platform. I'm sure maybe it's a network issue. We were supposed to have weekly briefings from SAPO on measures to alleviate the state of provisional liquidation that was imposed upon them. So I just wanted to get an understanding as to what were the deliberations around the request by SAPO to defer, the request by the department rather to defer deliberations on the bailout the South Post Office, because I think it is a matter of great concern and extreme urgency. And the fact that we only have 2 meetings left in this term should raise a further alarm. Deferments can't just be granted without substantive deliberation. So I wanted to have a sense on that. If deliberations were had while we had these connectivity issues, I would like to make a submission of my own. Thank you very much, Chair.
No, thank you, Honorable Tambo. As you have said, you have agreed that we closed on the first item we're dealing with, and we didn't have objection to that. Indeed, would take the indication that you may have missed this point, which was dealt with right in the beginning. Would have agreed to that, so there were no deliberations that you may have missed making your contribution on. But it agreed that reasons advanced that you are having negotiations just now before the court process would then be briefed by the ministry. With regard to the issue of the term and the meetings that are left, the understanding was that that weekly briefing would have meant in any way that you'd be outside of what has been submitted in the program. And that's why we've regarded the program as a living document. And if there are matters of interest, which this one is one of those, would be able to bring that within an amended agenda in that regard. I would therefore say that you will still have the opportunity to make submissions in that regard. We still hope to get the briefing on the preparations thereof on these matters by next week, as everybody would know that you expect Deputy Minister, unless I'm not correct, it's a matter that's coming up in the early part of the month. We're starting next week, so we should be able to get a report thereafter. And for that reason, because the item is not on the agenda, we had received the amended notice for purposes of the business for the meeting. Would deal with that submission at that point. So I want to just clarify that point, as I say, with this understanding that you may have had connectivity challenges as we dealt with right in the beginning. That's that. That's it, Honorable Tambo.
No, thank you, Chair, for the courage. I think as the FF, we must register our complete unhappiness with that. I mean, the state of the South African Post Office is concerning not only to us, but to the entire nation. And any delay or request for deferment will result in a situation where the institution continues to deteriorate. So we're very unhappy. And I think we must register that unhappiness that the department has requested that deferment. We think that SAPO must be one of the highest priorities of the department at this stage. So that was the only reason we raised the concern. We didn't raise it because we just seek to speak for speaking sake. It is a briefing that we had looked extremely forward to, and we must register our dissatisfaction in that regard. And there must be a confirmation on the meetings to speak specifically on the bailout conditions and deliverables by the department towards SAPO. Our weekly meeting must happen, and the meeting to speak to the specific deliverables surrounding the bailout must happen as well. It's something that cannot be delayed or deferred going forward. Otherwise, our suspicions that there's a deliberate effort to kill the post office are going to feel like they were true. So we don't want our suspicions to be proven true. We want to give the department the benefit of the doubt. So I just wanted to register that dissatisfaction. And a later stage is not a verifiable date to speak about an entity that's on its knees. We can't say we want to discuss it at a later stage. We need a verifiable date as to when we're going to speak about the bailout conditions for the post office. Almost 50% of its offices are being closed. We don't like repeating that point.
Honorable Tambo.
It's being sued. So
Honorable Tambo.
We're seeking that verification. Yes, Chair.
You've canvassed the point, and we've clarified that the matter would come, and that we are the ones who determine the program of the committee's members, and we have agreed that it's a living document. So matters of interest to the committee and the public at large receive that attention. And I've allowed you because you did not participate in the beginning of the meeting when this matter was on the table. But of course, we do accept that you've raised connectivity as one of the challenges. So who would attend to this? And I want to rule that because it's not on the agenda as we speak, members may not have a similar opportunity to respond to some of the points that you are making, of which some may be matters of debate from different perspectives that members would have. But what is common, though, is that both South Africans and ourselves as representatives of the people, we understand the importance of the post office. And it is for that reason that we also have to be responsible in the way we protect the discussions that are leading to the solution that makes the post office to be back to its operations and of course, secure its future through its implementation of the strategy of the post office of tomorrow. Right, and this includes then the use of the bailout on how it helps the post office, both in the current realities we're faced with, but also how it goes into the future. So you would have at least an ample opportunity to advance the views once the item is before the committee. But at this point, you have an amended notice that was circulated, and that's what determined the business for today. With that, honorable members, they would then need to move to the next point, really, which is the adoption of the minutes. Also important in making our recommendations legal, in that the minutes must have been approved. We will be then guided by the administration in terms of which minutes were in the minutes of the 14th of March. And we go on a page by page as we usually do. If there's any corrections to be made, you would indicate. Thank you.
Chair, thank you very much. We are going to request to be excused. Chairperson, thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Tam. Thank you.
Minutes of the 14th of March, Chairperson.
Well, on the minutes of the 14th of March, as we do not have corrections, may I then get a move and seconder?
I move, Chair.
Honorable Lala moves. Can I get a second?
A second, Chair.
That's a seconded. An objection as approving minutes. If no objection, we then move to the next set of minutes. Minutes of the 2nd May. There are no corrections. Can I also get a formal mover, seconder?
I move once more, Chair.
Honorable Lala moves. Can I get a seconder?
I'll second, Chairperson.
Seconded. Any objection? No objection. So the minutes are approved. We now present the minutes of the 5th of May. As members would be aware, some of these are already in the report submitted, debated in the plenaries. Can I get over and seconder?
I move, Chairperson.
Moves. Can I get a seconder?
I second.
Another second. An objection? Objection. Minutes approved. Present the 9th May. About the adoption of the reports. Can I get a mover and seconder?
Chairperson, I move.
Polani moves. Okay. Get a seconder?
I second, Chair.
Another seconds. An objection? An objection. The minutes are approved. We now present the minutes of the 16th of May. I'll now look for the mover and seconder that's present in the meeting. I'm sure you know why this qualification now. Can I get mover and seconder for the adoption of minutes?
I can't help you, Chairperson.
That's the reason I'm qualifying it beforehand. It's that you're not going to help at this point.
I can move. I can move, Chair, because I was there.
Honorable Mlala moves. Can I get seconder from those who are present? Or have we lost members of the platform? I see the hand there, Honorable Mtakani.
No, I second, Comrade Chair.
Honorable Mtakani seconds. So any objection in us approving the minutes? No. So the minutes are approved and therefore adopted. Angela, is there anything I'm leaving out?
No, Chairperson, that's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, honorable members. I take it that you have, you would have seen in the platform with regard to next week PC meeting. Angela, it's M201.
M201, Chair, second floor, Marks Building. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. So it will be physical at Marks Building, M201. So with that having been said now, we would indeed thank members once again for your participation and engagement. This concludes the business for our meeting. Meeting stays adjourned till we meet again. Thank you.